So getting you in front of folks like the speakers we have here today on external options for you. So I'm going to kick it off with Steve from Warner Norcross and Judd. He has been, he's a senior counsel with their team. He has extensive and varied experience counseling clients on all aspects of the employment relationship. His practice focuses on employee relation issues in both union and non-union workplaces and has represented clients for a number of national and state agencies. He assists employers in navigating all major federal and state labor and employment laws. With that, Steve, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Oh, you can have that.
Oh, you
I don't think I need that.
Well,
you guys can hear me.
For the folks on the WebEx, they will need you to talk into the microphone.
Okay, then I'm going to need something to put on. Sorry, because if I have to hold that, I won't be able to talk. Can we have a lavalier? Sorry about this guy. It's a nice way to start, huh? This is a weird room, by the way. You're all sideways. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people before. Usually, I'm looking at them or they're looking away. They're all sideways. It's kind of cool. How's that? Can you hear me? I know you can hear me. Can the people on I'm being filmed? Hi guys, can you hear me too? Thanks. All right, my name is Steve Palazzola. I'm an attorney. We're going to start talking about the law, which is a weird topic to talk about when we're talking about mental health, but it's becoming more and more and more a prevalent topic in workplaces now. When I was a young man, well, way long ago, before most of you were born, the big problem in workplaces was back injuries. Everybody had a back problem. Why were back injuries big problems back then? Because they were really hard to diagnose and they were really hard to prove. If somebody had a sore back, the doctor usually took their word for it. Unless there was a spinal injury, you know, a soft tissue injury is hard to diagnose. Well, if you think we had trouble back then, think about where we are now with mental health issues and people coming into work and saying, hey, I'm stressed, I need time off. So I'm going to give you 3 scenarios to start out with, and then we'll keep these in mind as we talk. You've got an employee and she takes FMLA leave for the month of February. Why does she want to take FMLA leave in February? Because it's cold and dark here. Who wants to work in February, right? So she takes FMLA leave and one of her coworkers comes into you and shows you a picture of her celebrating her mother's birthday in sunny Daytona Beach, Florida. And she's toasting with champagne and having a good old time while she is supposed to be at home on leave because she's depressed. All right, you got another employee. He was tragically injured in a car accident caused by a drunk driver. He takes FMLA leave to undergo multiple surgeries and physical therapy. He comes back to work, but he starts having attendance issues. He comes to you and asks for more leave after the accident's lingering effect on his health. He has no FMLA left, but he wants more time off, and he appears perfectly fine to you, so what do you do about that? And finally, you got Pam. She's a great employee, and she's been a great employee forever. But now, she's starting to have issues at work. She's starting to lose her temper and things like that. And recently she yelled and swore at one of her supervisors when they corrected her work. So you fired her. After you fired her, she came to your office and said, she's crying and said, hey, can I have another chance? I stopped taking my medication for bipolar. Okay? So keep those 3 things in mind as we talk, all right? Let's see how we work this. There we go. Well, okay. Before we get started, this slide that I just went past, that one. There I go. In fiscal year 2021, which is the last year we have statistics for, the EEOC, everybody know who the EEOC is? Okay, you guys are all HR people, right? So you know, or you do HR stuff, so you know who the EEOC is. The EEOC took 8,400 charges from individuals alleging employment discrimination of some kind because of either a mental health issue or a substance disorder issue. Now that number is up. All right, that was 2021. It's now 2023. What's happened since then? The pandemic has happened since then. We expect this year for that number to be way up and have a lot more mental health issues. Now, the other thing you guys know, as you know, because you're in HR, is that's only part of the story, right? 8,400 charges might not seem a lot, but that's only part of the story. That doesn't include state statutes, because the EEOC only handles federal stuff, and it doesn't include state lawsuits. So the number here of employees that are complaining that they're being discriminated against because of mental health issues is growing and growing and growing, and it's going to be growing exponentially. I don't know if all of you saw yesterday, but the Surgeon General has now declared that loneliness is actually an epidemic in this country now. That's all part of what we're talking about, right? Part of what's causing these issues among people. All right, so let's start with the FMLA, because there's really two main statutes that we have to talk about when we're talking about health. The first is the Family and Medical Leave Act, and the second is the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, we've got state laws too, but the state laws in this area aren't as robust as the federal law. The Michigan Persons with Disabilities Act is not as robust as the Americans with Disabilities Act when it comes to employee protections, and there is no Michigan FMLA, only the federal FMLA. All right, so what's the FMLA do for employees? It gives employees 12 work weeks of leave in a 12-month period. The leave can be, there's 26 weeks, but that's just for a very specific military purpose. If you have somebody that got hurt and basically in combat and you have to take care of them, you can get 26 weeks for that. Leave can be intermittent, as short as an hour. An employee can take FMLA leave for, all right? And they get continued health benefits during all that time. You cannot cut off their health care. And they get reinstatement to the same or similar position that they held before they left the leave. All of that's guaranteed by law. It's required if an employee is eligible for FMLA leave. Now, we've got another thing going in Michigan here now, right? Everybody knows what the Michigan Paid Medical Leave Act is, right? And you all know the brouhaha we had over that. Now, that's only 40 hours of leave, but it gives similar kinds of protections under Michigan law. Okay. Why can you take FMLA leave? You all know this, right? But let's go through it real quickly anyway. All right? For your own serious health condition, to care for a service member, to care for somebody else with a serious health condition, or for birth, adoption, placement of a child in foster care. Now, what we're going to talk about primarily today is your own serious health condition. So what's a serious health condition? Everybody know? Somebody tell me. No, I'm kidding. You don't have to tell me. This is a serious health condition, all right? First of all, if you go into the hospital, that's a serious health condition, a condition involving inpatient care, all right? Continued incapacity for 3 or more consecutive days, not work days, by the way, days, where the employee can't do something, 3 or more days, and continuing treatment. And that's the big one, right? That's the one you guys see all the time when somebody asks for FMLA leave. They've got a problem. They're going to be off work for a week or 2 weeks or 5 weeks. They have to see the doctor twice, or they're getting drugs. That's continuing care, all right? And drugs doesn't mean over-the-counter drugs. It means prescription drugs. Chronic long-term conditions like, I don't know, depression can be covered as a serious health condition, treatment needed to prevent a serious health condition, and then any condition caused by pregnancy, right? Or prenatal care. So those are the serious health conditions under the Act. Those are the things you can take FMLA leave for. So how does mental health roll into that? Well, mental health clearly qualifies as a serious health condition in a lot of situations, all right? All right, so look at Brooks United there. In Brooks United, the court said a course of antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication, as long as it is prescription medication, can be continuing treatment under the FMLA. Now, we all knew that, but the court obviously felt like they had to tell us that because somebody sued over it. So somebody didn't know it, right? But you still have to satisfy the statutory definition when we're talking about mental health issues. There's a big difference between I'm sad and I'm clinically depressed. There's a medical difference between I'm sad and I'm sad. We all get sad. We all have things that bother us. We all even get a little depressed from time to time. But there's a difference between that and medical, clinical, diagnosed depression. So you've got to meet that definition, all right? So in Hoban, the plaintiff missed 4 days because of his brother's death. And he was understandably upset about that. His brother had died. And he wanted FMLA leave for that. Now, that seems right. 4 days, right? That's more than 3. But the court said, no. You've got to have an actual diagnosed mental illness to qualify for FMLA. And just being sad because of your brother's death is not enough. Now, if he would have gone to a doctor, and if the doctor would have said, ooh, you're depressed, and if the doctor would have said, I need to see you again in a week, that's continuing treatment, And that might have qualified, but he didn't do those things in that case. So he wasn't covered by the act. All right. So when we're talking about FMLA, how does all this kick off, right? How do we get to the point where we have to start thinking as HR professionals about FMLA and does it apply? Now, I'm going to tell you this, I'm going to give you just a little hint right now. If anybody ever comes to you and says, look, I need 3 days off, you should start thinking FMLA right now. Because first question you should ask is why? Well, I'm going to in for surgery, because I got a bum knee and I'm going in for surgery and I need 3 days off. And then you're automatically thinking about FMLA. Now, can you ask an employee why they want time off? Of course you can, right? Everybody know what HIP is? What's HIP? Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, I think. Yeah, I think that's right. I can't remember if there's 2 P's or 2 A's. It's 2 A's, right? I think so. All right, so an employee's going to say to you, I don't have to tell you why I want time off because I'm protected by HIPAA and I don't have to give you my medical information. Wrong. Wrong, 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 okay? HIPAA prevents the doctor from telling you things. It does not prevent you from asking the employee, why do you want time off? And they have to tell you. And if they don't tell you, you don't have to give them FMLA leave. All right? Miles versus Nashville Electric Services. The employee suffered from a psychotic breakdown and took FMLA leave. The day after she returned to work, she informed her supervisor that she wouldn't be coming back to work and submitted her resignation. She got home and went, oops, I probably shouldn't have quit my job. So she went back and sought to rescind her resignation. And the employer said, no, we're not going to allow you to rescind your resignation. You resign. I'm sure what the employer was thinking was, this was a problem employee who never came to work anyway. Here's my opportunity to get rid of her. I'm not taking her back. So she sued. And the court found that the employer did not have a duty to inquire further into why because when she sued, what she said was, what I needed was more FMLA leave. I needed more time off. And the employer should have asked me why I was quitting. And the court said, no. There's limits to what an employer's obligations are. All right? In this case, in Cobus, the employee told the supervisor that they needed mental health leave to deal with head and neck pain. All right? And the supervisor, being smart here, because this is a medical condition, right? And what should you be thinking of first? FMLA, when they ask for leave. Said, are you asking for FMLA leave? And of course, the employee didn't know what FMLA leave was. So they said, well, I don't know. Maybe. And the supervisor said, okay, if you're asking for medical FMLA leave, I need you to fill out these forms. You guys all know what I'm talking about, the medical certification forms, right? And of course, the employee didn't want to fill out the forms. Now, why do you suppose the employee didn't want to fill out the forms? Because the employee hadn't seen a doctor about any of this. He was just claiming he had head and neck pain and he wanted time off, and he thought the FMLA gave him that time off. So he said, look, I don't have a doctor. I don't want to go to the doctor. Doctors are expensive. Don't make me go to the doctor. Is there any other leave I can have? And the supervisor said no. And so he quit. And of course, he sued. And he sued claiming FMLA interference. You interfered with my right to take FMLA leave. And the court in this case obviously said, no, they didn't. The supervisor asked you if you wanted FMLA leave, gave you the paperwork for FMLA leave. You chose not to fill the paperwork out. Therefore, you're not entitled to FMLA leave. Now, that means we've got a balance here, right? Between the employer's obligation to ask and the employee's obligation to give information. We can skip that. You guys all know who is covered. All right, so what are the employer's obligations to ask, and what are the employee's obligations to give information? Again, if an employee comes to you and says they need time off because they're sick, I want you to default to FMLA and go right to FMLA. Now, the employee does not need to say, hey, I need FMLA leave. They don't have to use FMLA to be entitled to FMLA. They just need to tell you they need time off because of a medical condition. And then you have a duty as an employer to say, okay, I need more information to make a decision about whether or not that leave is covered by the FMLA. Is it or is it not covered by the FMLA? And if it is covered by the FMLA, what do you have to do? All right, everybody wake up. Come on. You have to give out the paperwork, right? You have to make sure the employee has the paperwork. You have to do the notice of rights and responsibilities. Y'all know what I'm talking about, right? You have to. Let me tell you something about the FMLA. We'll talk about this with the ADA too. Of all the federal discrimination statutes, these two are paperwork statutes. In order to win an FMLA lawsuit, you better make sure you've got the paperwork filled out right. Right? It's better be done right and documented and in a file. This is a paperwork-intensive statute. Now, where do you get all this paperwork? Well, the federal government wrote it all for you. It's all online. Go to Google, my favorite research tool, and type in FMLA forms. And it'll take you right to a government website that gives you all the FMLA forms for free. You don't have to pay, you don't have to pay me to write them for you. You don't have to write them yourself. They're all right there. The government's got them for you. Use the government forms. Why? Are the government forms perfect? No, they're not. But if you use the government forms, it's really hard for somebody to complain your form's not right. This is the form the government told us to use, right? So don't make your own up. Use the government forms, all right? This is a paperwork statute, all right? So when an employee comes to you and says, hey, I need FMLA leave, we start there, right? We start there. And we decide whether or not we give the employee the proper forms, they return them and they give them to us. And then we decide whether or not the employee is entitled to FMLA leave and whether we grant it, and we fill out the proper form for them for that, and we give it to them, and it gives them all their rights and responsibilities. And what are the employee's duties? All right, now, as I told you, the first time an employee comes to you and says they need time off, they don't have to say FMLA. But that's the first time they come. All right, now let's say the employee's taking intermittent leave, and they've got a depression, and every once in a while when they're depressed, they're going to have a flare-up, and they're going to need to take a couple of days off. And that's what their certification says. So they're not taking the full 12 weeks in a row. They're just taking intermittent leave. When the employee calls in on a Friday and says, I'm not coming to work today, then the employee has to say, it's because of my FMLA certification. All right? Now, you do have a duty to ask them why, if they say, I'm not coming in today. And if they say, because I got a flat tire and I don't have a spare, that's not FMLA covered. But if they say, I'm depressed, that is FMLA covered, and you can count it. Now, do we want leave to be FMLA covered or not? What do you think? As HR people, should we want leave to be covered by the FMLA? Absolutely. Why? Exactly. We want to get the clock running, right? If employees are going to miss work, and if there's this leave out there that protects them when they miss work, don't we want them to use that up as quick as possible so that we don't have to worry about it anymore? Absolutely, we do. We want them to burn that leave up as quickly as we possibly can so that they don't have to use it anymore. All right, any questions about that? All right, let's talk about your favorite topic, FMLA abuse. Morin versus Red. Hang on, let me get back in my notes and see where I am. Because I think this is one of the examples I give you. Okay, Morin versus Redford Union School District, an FMLA abuse. Now, what's the problem with FMLA? The minute an employee gets, we used to call it the gone fishing excuse. The minute an employee gets an FMLA certification, all they have to do is call in and say, if it's for mental health, I'm depressed. All they have to do is call, it's Friday, the weather's nice. I need FMLA leave. Why? I'm depressed. Well, I'm going fishing, but that's why we called it the gone fishing excuse. But all the employee has to do is say, I'm depressed, and they're covered. There's really not much you can do about it, right? There's really not much you can do about it at all. And we'll talk about some of the details of that as we go on. All right? So in Morin versus Redford School District, Morin had a history of absenteeism from work. Sounds familiar to you? Got any employees like this? Don't come to work. All of a sudden they need FMLA. All right? She'd received warnings in the past for attendance issues, and Morin informed her employer that she needed 2 days off because she had tickets to go to Florida for her mother's birthday. Sound familiar? Morin's first name is Susie, right? The employer said, no, you cannot have the 2 days off to go to Florida. So Morin went to the doctor. And she was diagnosed with acute situational anxiety. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to pretend to be a doctor. I have no idea what that means, but that's what she was diagnosed with. Acute situational anxiety. And the doctor submitted a request for medical leave, and she missed 9 days of work as a result of her leave. All right? 9 days of work, even though she'd only asked for 2 days off to go to Florida. The employer did an investigation because they thought it was suspicious, just like you would. Wait a minute. She asked for 2 days off, and all of a sudden she's sick, right? So they commenced an investigation, and they called the doctor's office, who told them that the employer was totally incapacitated. Totally incapacitated, and that's why she couldn't come to work. So the employer called her at home, and of course, nobody answered because she was in Florida. All right? The employer, when she got back, called her to a meeting to find out the legitimacy of her doctor stating. And during the meeting and later during her deposition, she refused to provide additional information regarding her medical situation. The employer gave her a last chance agreement, said, you lied to us. Here's a last chance agreement, which she refused to sign. And she wasn't cooperative in the employer's attempt to determine the legitimacy. She sued for interference with my FMLA rights. You're discriminating against me because I took FMLA leave. Here's what the court said. There is nothing plainly inconsistent about traveling to Florida while an employee is suffering from acute situational anxiety. In fact, the plaintiff testified that the doctor told her that she should go on her trip because it was good for her depression. Okay? Does that sound right to you? No, but that's how broad the protections of this particular statute are, all right? So let me give you another example that's similar. You've got an employee who's depressed. They call in sick on Friday. Somebody comes into your office on Monday and says, Bob was playing golf on Friday. You want to fire Bob because Bob called in sick because he was depressed. And how can you play golf when you're depressed? And Bob's doctor might very well say in a deposition, golf is good for Bob's depression. Whenever he's sick, he should have time off. So what that means is that, now, that's not always the case. Okay, that is not always the case. I had a case a number of years ago where an employee had a kidney transplant, clearly FMLA covered, right? No doubt about it. And the transplant was successful. And the employee, after the transplant, once a month had a Friday doctor's appointment as a follow-up, all right? And the employer, rather than make the employee go to the doctor's appointment and come back to work, the employer was being nice and gave the guy the entire day off. Go to your doctor's appointment, then go home, do whatever you want to do. The guy took a Friday off for a doctor's appointment and then posted photographs on Facebook of himself playing in a softball tournament in Orlando, Florida at Disney World. When he came back to work on Monday, they brought him into the office and said, you need to explain this. Now, what's the difference between this guy? They fired him, by the way, and it stuck. What's the difference between this guy and going to Florida to be Mom's birthday? He took leave off for a very specific purpose, to go to the doctor. The doctor was in Royal Oak, Michigan, or someplace like that. It's very unlikely that he was at the doctor's office on Friday when, in fact, we have pictures of him in Orlando, Florida, playing softball. In other words, those two things are not consistent. You can't make the argument that, well, it was good for him to go to Orlando and skip his doctor's appointment. So each situation is different, right? And you have to apply it differently and look at it differently. When can I fire an employee for fraud or abuse under the FMLA, and when can't I? And you've got to be very careful. And someday you're going to call me or somebody like me and say, I want to fire that employee. And we're going to say to you, and you're going to get mad at us and say, oh, you won't let me fire anybody. And I'm going to say, I'm just trying to keep you out of court because lawsuits are expensive. This statute provides a lot of protection for that sort of thing. All right. On the other hand, Nelson versus Oshkosh Trucking Company, okay? Here, the employee suffered from migraines and anxiety, I think, right? Where'd it go? Oh, yeah. Migraines and anxiety. The employer became suspicious when the employee physically delivered work restrictions of 3 weeks after leave after calling in sick. Surveillance video showed the employee driving, shopping, walking, standing, changing a taillight, and carrying items. Certification indicated that the employee was unable to perform employment functions because they couldn't stand, sit, walk, move, lift, and speak. At the employer's request, the doctor clarified that the employee's ability to stand, carry, and sit was unpredictable due to his mental illness and medication side effects. The employer terminated the employee for false claims. What do you think? The employer win or the employee lose? Well, let's see. The employer lost, because this is another situation where the doctor said, look, the stuff he was doing is not inconsistent with my diagnosis, right? And just because he was doing this stuff away from work doesn't mean he couldn't, or he could go to work. And the jury concluded that could conclude that the jury's determination decisions were based on the employer's honest belief that they had abused leave, or it was an opportunity to get rid of a bad employee who didn't want to come to work. And that or that the court found is the problem here. So now, does the employer lose when it goes to a jury? Maybe they do, and maybe they don't. But the court said this has to go to a jury. How many of you want to be in front of a jury in an employment dispute? No, you don't. There's 6 people on a civil jury, okay? All 6 of those people have been employees at one point in time. Very few of them have been employers, if at all. So you're starting out in a hole, right down about here. And we got to work, even though we don't have to prove anything. The burden of proof is on the other side. You got to work really hard to get here before you even get here to win. Now, what do you think it costs to get in front of a federal jury? I guarantee you, you spent at least $125,000 of your own money before we even get into a courtroom with a jury in it. At least, all right? Now, if you win, that's cool, but you've still spent a lot of money to win. If you lose, by the time you get done with the jury trial, we're probably at about $250,000. And if you lose, you get to pay damages to the employee. And all of these statutes have attorney fee provisions in them, which means you get to pay for their lawyer too. All right? So winning can be even an expensive proposition, but losing is a really expensive proposition. So what we're trying to do is keep you from getting in front of that jury. All right, how do you curb FMLA abuse? We all have to deal with it. So you guys, you come to me and you say, well, come on, there's got to be something we can do about this. There is something you can do about it. What do I tell you? FMLA is a paperwork statute. Use the paperwork to your advantage, all right? When an employee comes to you and wants an FMLA leave, by the way, there's nothing under the statute that requires you to get an employee to give you a medical certification. For example, if an employee walks into your office and and I don't mean fat like me, I mean they're pregnant like this, and they say, I need FMLA leave because I'm going to have a baby, you might look at them and say, well, I don't really need doctor's proof there. It's pretty clear that person is having a baby. But, and that might be the one situation where you don't necessarily need, but to be consistent, you should make that employee get the certifications. So whenever an employee tells you they need medical time off, and whenever it should potentially covered by the FMLA, make them get the certifications. If the certification isn't complete, or it's not clear, or it's not fully filled out, which we see all the time, get it clarified. You have a right to do that under the statute. You can go back to the employee and say, this isn't filled out correctly. Your doctor has to fill it out completely. All right? Update your job descriptions to make sure that you've got essential functions fully listed. That's important here, not only here, but it's important under the ADA too, which we're going to talk about. require or make employees use their PTO and their vacation time up. All right, now under the FMLA, you have a choice to say to employees, if you're going to take FMLA, you got to use all your PTO first. Okay, let me clarify that. Not first before they take FMLA, but in the first few weeks they're on FMLA. They've got to use up that PTO. Under the statute, you can make them do that, or they can choose to do it if they want, if you don't make them do it. My suggestion to you is, look, okay, we want to be humans, and we don't want to make a person burn up all their vacation just because they're sick, but you might want to make them burn up some of it, part of it. Let them save a week if they want, so they can take a vacation later on, but make them use some of it. An employee is less likely to fake an FMLA leave if, excuse me, they got to burn up their PTO to do it. All right? Under the statute, you can tell employees, look, if you're going in for medical treatment, you have to make an effort to schedule your medical treatment under the FMLA at a time that doesn't interfere with your work. Now, that's harder to do for some people than it is for others. But I've had situations before where an employee had, they got to take one day off a month for medical treatment, and they worked third shift. And they thought that allowed them to take, Sunday night off. I don't know about you, but I don't know many doctors that are open on Sunday night. And require compliance with your call-in procedures. Okay, just because a person has FMLA does not mean they can ignore your call-in procedures. What do I mean by your call-in procedures? If you got a procedure in your handbook that says an employee has to call in 1 hour before their scheduled shift, and they're not doing that, they might be protected by the FMLA leave for the time off, but they're not protected by the FMLA for not following your procedures. So enforce your rules. And then, don't retaliate. Plaintiff's bar's favorite word in the English language is retaliation. Why? You can lose your underlying discrimination suit if you're a plaintiff. In other words, I'll sue you because you discriminated against me because I'm disabled. And the jury can come back and say, nope, they did not discriminate you because you were disabled. You lose, plaintiff, and still win your retaliation suit. Yeah, but when I told them I was disabled, they fired me for it. Or when I complained about my disability, they fired me for it. Almost every single charge filed with the EEOC today has a retaliation component in it somewhere. It is very rare not to see a retaliation component in there. All right, so we got Gordon versus U.S. Capitol Police. What year is this? It's a 2015 case, okay? There was an officer that was granted intermittent leave because they need treatment for depression. When they got the FMLA leave, the employer took some action against the employee. They required a fitness for duty test despite lack of performance issues. Now, can you require a fitness for duty test when somebody takes FMLA leave? Can you require them to get you a fitness for duty certification when they come back? The answer is yes, you can. But you have to uniformly apply that policy to everybody in similar situations that takes the leave. In other words, I can't make you take a fitness for duty test because I don't like you and let you come back to work without a fitness for duty test if you're in the same job doing the same thing, right? I have to require it uniformly, all right? They took away this employee's gun, which I got a little problem with this one from the court. I mean, that seems pretty prudent to me when you have an employee with depression issues to take away their sidearm. But that's just me. They put her on desk duty, which is okay if she couldn't do patrol duty, but they put her on a desk job with no overtime, and she was getting lots of overtime doing her patrol duty. So basically, they took away her overtime. And they required a doctor's note for every time she took an intermittent leave. Problem with that? Absolutely 100% illegal. Can't do it. Once an employee has a certification for intermittent leave, and they call in and say, I'm taking an FMLA leave today, you can't say to them, you have to give me a doctor's note proving that whatever's wrong with you happened on that day. Not on the FMLA, not when they're on FMLA. The trial court dismissed the interference claim, and the appellate court reversed and remanded and restated the plaintiff's claim. Okay, so that's the FMLA. And if that's not bad enough, that's only half the story. Because now we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, all right? Now, the ADA is a weird statute too. And why is the ADA a weird statute? Because every single discrimination statute in the United States requires you to treat people exactly the same. Doesn't matter how old you are, what your religion is, what color your skin is, whether you're a man or a woman, we have to treat people the same across the board. Every single one, except this one. Okay? Here we have to treat you the same if you have a disability, and then just a little bit better. And what do I mean by a little bit better? This statute requires that employers provide reasonable accommodations to the known disabilities of individuals who are otherwise qualified individuals to do their job. What is a disability? Pretty much everything. Thanks to the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendment Act. A disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more life activities. That's what a disability is. That's the definition from the statute. But you are also protected under the ADA if you have a record of being disabled. If you used to have cancer, but you're now cured, you can be protected under the ADA. And if we regard you as being disabled. What does that mean? How do we regard somebody as being disabled? I'm going to give you an overly simplistic answer. An employee comes in to you, talks to you about something. They get a little carried away. They get a little emotional, whatever. They walk out. You walk out on the floor. You're talking to some people. You say, man, that guy's crazy. All right? That seems pretty innocuous, right? That's evidence that you regard the person as being disabled. But it can be used as evidence. It doesn't mean you're going to lose a lawsuit. But you got to be careful about what you say now, right? We've become a little more attuned to that sort of stuff. You have to be, a lot of stuff that I said when I was a kid on the playground, like, I'm going to kill you, you don't say anymore on the playground. Two of my kids are teachers. Kids say that stuff on the playground now, straight to the principal's office. And for good reason. Because when I was a kid, kids weren't killing other kids in school. I mean, they were. We just weren't hearing about it. Now we're hearing about it all the time. So you got to be careful about what you say. So when the ADAA was passed, ADAAA was passed, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act Amendments Act, which amended the ADA, we got a new list of things that were considered disabilities automatically under the statute. And they include major depression, schizophrenia, PTSD, bipolar disorder, and OCD. An impairment that's episodic, that comes and goes, is still a disability when it's flaring up. All right? What isn't a disability? Now, there's limits to all of this, all right? Normal sadness, grief, not a disability. All right? Appropriate stress caused by work, not a disability. The definition of what appropriate stress caused by work has changed dramatically in the last 3 years. Because stuff that I deal with every day, that you guys deal with every day now that causes stress to you, 3 years ago, that would have put you, out of work for 6 weeks getting help. Now it just seems like it's normal, but appropriate stress caused by work. And then certain mental issues like kleptomania and pyromania and stuff like that, they're specifically excluded from the statute. So if you compulsively steal things, you're not disabled under the act. You don't get away with that. Well, I stole that. Yeah, but I have kleptomania. So you have to let me off the hook. No. All right. So under the ADA, an employee who wants an accommodation has to ask for an accommodation, right? They have to request it. Just like in FMLA, I need time off work. In ADA, they have to request an accommodation. All right? Now, they don't have to say, I need an accommodation under the ADA. Say, I need help with my job. And that, again, now we've got our little HR trigger going off. And we're saying, okay, is this an ADA request or is this just something else? And we should ask that question. If an employee requests time off because they're depressed and stressed, is that an accommodation request? Well, it depends on who you ask. According to the EEOC, that is an accommodation request. Now, where do you go before you go to court? The EEOC. Got to win there first, right? So the EEOC says that's an accommodation request. So when an employee comes to you and says, boy, I need time off, I'm really depressed, I got a lot of stress going on, you should be thinking ADA. Okay, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about just normal everyday stress, or are we talking about something different? Now, there's a couple of courts out there that say mere reference to anxiety is insufficient to trigger an ADA notice. Now, I want to give you some cause on this. That's a Seventh Circuit case. The Seventh Circuit is Illinois, Indiana, I can't remember, but it's definitely Illinois, right? The Seventh Circuit, which we're not in, we're in the Sixth. The Seventh Circuit is the most employer-friendly court in the country. And they don't like the ADA or the FMLA. And they've made some rulings that none of the other courts in the country have followed. So you have to be a little careful with Seventh Circuit cases. All right. When an employee asks for an accommodation, the first thing we want to discuss is the employee actually a qualified individual with a disability? Because you only have to provide reasonable accommodations to employees who are qualified individuals with disabilities. Well, what is a qualified individual with a disability? Look, anybody who's currently in their job is a qualified individual. That doesn't necessarily mean they have a disability, but they're a qualified individual until they give you proof that they're not anymore, all right, and that something has happened to them that they're not. So a qualified individual with a disability is an individual who can perform the essential functions of their job with or without a reasonable accommodation. I'll give you an example. Way back when, there were two sisters who wanted to be airline pilots. And they were not allowed to be airline pilots or get into whatever training program they had to get into with United Airlines because their vision, one was 2200 corrected, and the other was 2300 corrected. In other words, they were both basically legally blind. And they sued United Airlines saying, hey, you have to let us be airline pilots because we're disabled and you have to accommodate our disability. And United Airlines, being smart, said, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. You can't see. And this case went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. And the Supreme Court of the United States in that case said, look, you are clearly not. Being able to see is an essential function of an airline pilot's job. Thank goodness, huh? And you're not a qualified individual. Now, that's an extreme example, but it's an example of what we're talking about here. So essential functions are based on job descriptions, performance evaluations, the actual time the employee spends doing the function, the consequences of not performing the function, and so on. Now, when I say job descriptions, you have to remember that the EEOC will not consider a job description unless it was written before the employee took the job, okay? So if you want your job descriptions to outline essential job functions, and trust me when I tell you you do, you've got to make sure those job descriptions are written before the employee starts suing you or coming after you for an accommodation. Otherwise, the EEOC will ignore them completely, all right? If they're written before the employee asks for the accommodation, starts doing the job, and so on and so forth, if it's a standard job description, the EEOC will give a lot of weight to that job description. They don't like to second guess employers when it comes to what is required to do the job. They don't. All right, what about handling stress? So Mayo versus PC Structurals. We had a welder who had a major depressive disorder. Now, this caused the welder, in this particular case, to threaten to kill his coworkers and he described how he was going to do it in graphic detail. Looks like I got 5 minutes to go. He described how he was going to do it in graphic detail. His employer fired him. Big shock, right? And he sued, claiming, hey, I've got major depressive disorder. I'm disabled. You should have known that my threat to kill these employees was only a result of my disability, and you should have accommodated my disability. What do you think? Well, you can all read the slide. I shouldn't have put that up there. Of course, I say of course, like it's normal that employee would have lost, but that employee lost. And the court said, look, and I think they stretched a little here. I think what the court should have done is just said, look, we don't care what the statute says. We're not going to have employees in the workplace threatening to kill their coworkers. End of story. But they didn't. They said, actually, it is an essential function of almost any job to be able to handle stress and interact with others. Now, I would say that's true, but I would say what he did went way beyond normal, not playing well in the sandbox, right? This is a little odd. And in this day and age, with everything going on in the world, we're not going to let an employee who threatens other employees keep their job. We're just not. Okay. Waltz versus whatever that is. Here we had an analyst with a bipolar disorder. This caused her to interrupt meetings, disturb coworkers, and disrespect her supervisor. Sound familiar? This was the second case I gave you this morning, right? Again, the court here said she was disruptive, erratic, and rude, and that being able to interact with others is an essential function of the job. Therefore, she's not a qualified individual with a disability, and therefore you can fire her. In other words, you don't have to let employees swear at their supervisors, right? You can fire her. Williams versus AT&T Mobile. We had a call center rep with depression and anxiety. She sued, she got fired, and she sued claiming that she was missing a lot of work. And she sued claiming that, hey, look, I've got this disability, you have to accommodate my disability. And the court held, look, she had long leaves, unpredictable leaves, and the job required her to be physically present in order to do the job and logged onto her computer to answer calls. And because she couldn't be physically present, she wasn't a qualified individual with a disability. Now, the interesting thing about that is what the court ruled. This is a Sixth Circuit case right here where we are too, by the way. But notice it's pre-pandemic. All right? The EEOC takes the position that attendance is never an essential job function. How's that sound to you? That attendance is never an essential job function. Now, they do that by saying attendance isn't a duty you perform. Little odd. But that's what the EEOC holds. Now, we are living the Sixth Circuit, so we get to rely on this case, and we get to say, yeah, attendance actually can be an essential job function. All right, so when an employee comes to you and asks for an accommodation, what do you do? What do you do? Look, here's rule number one. If the accommodation they want is easy, hey, I need a special ink pen because it's got to have a fat ink pen because my arthritis won't let me hold the pen. That annoys my wife when I say ink pen, by the way. She's like, what other kind of pen is there? I need a special pen. Just do it, right? Come on, just buy the pen. We got to send her to a doctor and prove she's got arthritis. Just do it. Now, if it's not easy, then we engage in the full interactive process. Now, when I say interactive process, do you all know what I'm talking about? Taylor, how am I doing that time? 1 minute. I want to cover this. Okay, this is important. When I say interactive process, do you all know what I'm talking about? Because this is nowhere in the statute, by the way. This is something that the regulators made up. The interactive process, when an employee comes to you and asks for a reasonable accommodation, you are supposed to sit down with that employee and discuss what's wrong with them, get the medical proof that you need, which you are required and allowed, or not required, but allowed to do. If a disability is not apparent on its face, and mental health disabilities are not apparent on their face, generally speaking, you are allowed to say to that employee, you need to bring me a doctor's note that says you're disabled. And if you don't, I don't have to accommodate you. And when the employee says, I don't have to tell you my medical history because it's covered by HIPAA, what do you say? Wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. If you want this accommodation, you do. But you are supposed to sit down with that employee once you have all the information you need and talk to them about what you can do to accommodate them and what they need to be accommodated and whether or not you can do any of those things and whether they're reasonable. It's a conversation with the employee. Now, you got to document the heck out of that conversation because, again, this is another statute that is highly paperwork intensive. All right, so document. But you must engage in the interactive process, and you must be able to prove you did. And a lot of times, if you do it and do it right, it'll get you off the hook if you do get sued. Okay, so engage in the interactive process. I got a bunch more slides here, and I didn't do a very good job of getting through them. But they're all here. You can read them later, all right? So, because I'm out of time. So thank you all very much.
Our next speaker joins us from Hope Network.
Or should I?
We have Casey Pickert here joining as a Zero Suicide Initiative Project Director. She provides oversight for the implementation of the Zero Suicide model across the state of Michigan to raise awareness and improve care and outcomes for individuals who are at risk for suicide, including system-wide staff training, screening, and referral processes. So please welcome Casey.
Thank you so much. All right, so thank you so much, Taylor, for the introduction and for the opportunity to be here today. So again, my name is Casey Pickert. I'm the Zero Suicide Initiative Project Director at Hope Network. Many of you have probably heard of Hope Network before, but for those who have not, we are a pretty large nonprofit behavioral health organization across the state of Michigan. Primarily, though, in the West Michigan area in Kent County. We provide a wide array of behavioral health services, long-term residential, outpatient, crisis residential, centers for autism, neurorehabilitation, transportation, really all of those social supports and connections to provide people with those social determinants of health and really give them a life worth living. So we were awarded a 5-year grant from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration to be able to provide a training that you are going to be receiving today. But this is going to be a condensed version of the longer training. So we have about 40 minutes today, and the training is usually 1 hour and 15 minutes long. So you'll get kind of a preview of what the information and education that we would be able to potentially provide your organizations as well. We just trained all of the Grand Rapids Police Department in this training. We go into libraries, many other different nonprofits. Really anyone can benefit from the information that you're going to learn today. Before we do get started, I would also just like to share that the information we're going to be learning about today is heavy. It is about suicide prevention. So if you are going through any type of recent trauma or recently lost a loved one or someone close to you, it may be best for you to step out. It's really important that we are engaging in self-care and having our own mental health be a priority here today. So if anyone does need to leave the room at any time during the next 40 minutes, maybe just give me a little thumbs up before you leave. I will be here again, as Taylor mentioned, afterwards if anyone does want to debrief or talk anything through. So, and again, this is May. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, in case you weren't aware. It's quite a common myth that suicides occur most frequently around the holiday season. That's not true. Research says that actually May is the highest rates for suicide based on historical figures. So really important that we're getting this information out here today. It can be a really heavy topic. Many of us have our own lived experiences, but it's still important that we are talking about it to help reduce that stigma. So throughout the next 30 or so minutes, we're going to go through some statistics around suicide prevention, and really that's just to lay the groundwork, get everyone on the same page, a solid understanding of why we do need to talk about this. And then we're going to learn about some common myths and misperceptions around suicide. Typically in that section, we do a little bit more discussion and go through each one, but today we'll go through it a little bit more briefly. After that, we will learn some of the common clues and warning signs around suicide, and then go into the QPR, the question, persuade, refer intervention around suicide. Again, QPR, question, persuade, refer. We like to compare it to CPR. Many of you may have your employees, go through CPR as a required training. This is very similar. If you're experiencing a life-threatening event, you utilize those skills to be able to potentially save someone's life. And again, these, just as a caveat, these slides were all just updated, so there's all these kind of new transitions that go along with them. So my apologies if I kind of have to flip back and forth. The slide deck completely changed just about a week ago. So after learning the warning signs, we'll learn question, persuade, refer. We'll go over what those 3 steps are, and then learn some additional tips. I'm sorry, I'm just going to put that back there. And then Typically in the longer version of the training, we would do some practice, some role play, similar to CPR, where you learn the concept of the information and then you practice it. We would do that. But today, we're not going to do that, but just know in the longer version of the training, that is what happens. So before we kind of get started with the statistics, there's a lot of different resources on your table that you can see. Most of them are that I brought here today, and those are related to today's information. There's a lot of information to get through, so please take any of those resources back to you and your teams. I have more copies, and send any of these electronically. There's clues and warning signs. There's the QPR booklet. There is also a mental health resource brochure that you can fold up. I'm a member of the Kent County Suicide Prevention Coalition, and we developed a resource so that you can kind of know where to refer people if someone does need help across the county. With that, an employee assistance program. We always bring this up at the beginning of the training too. If anyone, at the beginning of the training, everyone might be feeling okay. Certain emotions might arise throughout the information. Most of your companies probably do have some type of employee assistance program as part of, wellness and mental health. So I always refer individuals to that as well within their organization. Again, the information you're learning today is pretty high level. We go into many different types of organizations. So just please make sure any of the information that I'm sharing today, you still defer to your own organization's specific policies and protocols. Again, the information can be utilized for your colleagues, for each other, for your loved ones. Really anyone in the community can benefit from what you're going to learn. All right, so starting with the statistics. So all of this information, again, is from the QPR Institute. They are the accrediting body over this training. I became certified. I've trained over 1,000 individuals across really the world. So just know all the information is from the CDC. It's backed up by over 20 years of research. Over $20 million has been invested in it. It's one of only 4 evidence-based trainings that are taught across the nation. So I just like to share that so you know where the information is coming from. So since about 2009, you can see that there's been an increase in deaths by suicide across the entire nation. There's a slight decrease in 2019 and 2020. A lot of research is going on as to why that is. We did see another increase in 2021, a 4% increase in there. Researchers did predict that as we're kind of getting out of the pandemic. Again, as was previously just shared, a lot of people are experiencing that burnout, that stress, these financial situations, many people losing their jobs, and it's really taking a lot of toll on many different individuals. So the timing of deaths by suicide. So there is one suicide death every 11 minutes or 130 suicides every single day. In the state of Michigan, last year there was 1,300 suicides reported, which equates to one death by suicide every 6 hours. Specifically in Kent County, there has been an increase as well. So in 2020, there were 63 deaths, 2021, 83. Last year, there were 86. In January alone, 2023, this year, there were 15 deaths. So if we, times that by 12, then we're already going to be increasing this year as well. Again, it's really hard, but that's really to be quite transparent that it's happening. We got to talk about it. We got to help reduce that stigma so that people have a space to reach out and that we can connect them to help. Suicide deaths do not discriminate against any race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and certainly not age either. That 4% increase that you saw on that previous slide, the largest age group is this age group of ages 15 to 24. Deaths by suicide are the second leading cause of death for this age group, and we're continuing to see it rise. A lot of research is going on as well with that, and the increase kind of in social media and bullying within schools. So we certainly need to be focusing on the younger age group as well and what we can be doing for them. A lot more statistics on this slide as well. I'm not going to go through each one. The one I really just want to point out for today, and I guess before I get started with that, you can see some of these statistics are from 2020. So it seems like that is a little while ago, but I do want to just mention as well that the information you are seeing is the most recent that we have. With deaths by suicide, specifically in the coroner's report, there is a delay to ensure that the death was in fact a suicide. So just please know that the information that we have is the most readily available and credible. So again, the last bullet point I want to bring to your attention, we're talking a lot about deaths by suicide here, but it's also really important that we're focusing on the significant amount of people that are thinking about suicide, that are making a plan, and then following through on that plan. The earlier that we can help intervene and upstream when an individual is thinking about it, the more likely we can keep them safe and get them connected to help, and that they're also at lower risk. So again, that's where learning what those clues and warning signs are, even the ones you might not catch, the ones that might not be as direct, are really important. And also having the tools to be able to open up that conversation, because it's not easy, but it's important. So employee burnout, again, I just wanted to add this slide in here as well, since I think it's really relevant to you and your teams. About 76% of employees experience burnout on the job at least sometimes. And we know that burnout can lead to, increased stress and potentially more depression, anxiety. All of this is kind of interconnected. So again, it's really important that we are focusing on employees' health here and giving them those resources. According to this one study I looked at, 80% of employees do believe their employers have a responsibility to address their health and well-being. So to do something, and as well as at least 1 in 6 workers experience mental health problems like anxiety and depression. So again, that's a lot of people, and so really important that we are prioritizing that. And I know that some of the discussion afterwards will get into that a little bit deeper. All right, just a few more statistics before we transition into a little bit different topic. So suicide is the 12th leading cause of death. Before COVID, it was number 10, but then COVID moving up to number 3, and then kidney disease also on the rise at number 11. The point I want to bring up here with each of you is at the bottom. You can see that homicides rank the 16th leading cause of death. So we have homicides at 16, we have suicides at number 12. So in the news, amongst each other, we talk so much more about homicides as opposed to suicides. However, you can see the rates on the screen that suicides are almost double that. So in the training, this is where we have a little bit of discussion around why that might be, what might be causing that. Why do we talk so much more about homicides, even though suicides are nearly double the amount? And the biggest reason really there is the stigma that still exists around suicidality and mental health as a whole. And there's a lot of work being done around safer suicide prevention messaging across the state, across the nation. And it's really important how we talk about suicide and mental health to give people that safe space to be able to reach out for help. When celebrity goes on to die by suicide, the rates do increase across the nation. And it's okay to talk about suicide. It's okay to report on it in the news. It's just really important how we're doing it and making sure that it's a safe messaging. It's okay to say it's a death by suicide, but we don't need to get in the details of exactly what that act will look like, because contagion does, unfortunately, is a real thing. It's also important that for any information out there, a news article that's talking about suicide, that we do have resources embedded in that article. So for example, you can see here on each screen, we have the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. That is a 24/7, 365 days a year, free resource to anyone if you dial 988 to be connected to a trained counselor, someone to talk to, someone to refer, someone to help. You can also call on behalf of someone else if you are concerned about someone as another tool. So that's on every single slide. Again, if you're going to ask someone about suicide, it's very important you know who you're going to refer them to if they do respond with yes. So there's a study done at the University of Kentucky a few years back that demonstrated for every single death by suicide, 115 additional people were exposed, 53 have short-term disruption in life, 25 have major life disruption, and 11 have devastating effects on their life. So the point really with this slide here is that when someone goes on to die by suicide, it doesn't just impact them. It affects their loved ones, their colleagues, their workplace, their community, and especially those in smaller, tight-knit communities. So really reinforcing the message here that we all do play a role in this. We can all help to prevent additional suicides. Many times, I'm asked, what causes someone to go on to die by suicide? Why does this keep happening? And it's really hard for me to answer. Suicide is the most complex human behavior. It's not typically one thing or one action that causes someone to die by suicide. It's typically, as you can see here, many different factors that do contribute. What we do know is that about 90% of individuals who do go on to die by suicide did have a diagnosable mental health condition at the time of their death. So that could be anxiety, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, just to name a few. But again, that still leaves a 10% there. And that remaining 10% could have had a mental health disorder and it wasn't diagnosed, or they couldn't have had one at all. Again, it does not discriminate against anyone. Anyone can be impacted. So you can see here these really significant life events that an individual might be going through that could lead them to thinking about suicide. A relationship problem, losing a job, a legal problem, loss of housing. These are really tough situations that an individual might be going through. So if they have one of these amongst other things going on, it can contribute to that potentially. So if you do have a loved one or a colleague that might be going through one of these tough situations, it's really important just to check in on them more regularly. Ask them, what's going on? How can I help? Even just being a listening ear can really help. Really reducing that sense of loneliness. So those are really some of the reasons why we like to do this training, why we like to share this information, the question, persuade, refer. When someone does talk about wanting to end their own life, it can be really disorienting, both for that individual as well as for yourself. There's a lot going on in our heads. We're scared we might say the wrong thing. So having kind of these 3 steps, QPR, question, persuade, refer, can really help to navigate through that conversation. And again, we understand that today might not be the day for everyone to go through this training. Again, really just to keep a safe space for everyone when we're doing this with larger groups especially, just always want to check in. And again, yeah, QPR is not intended to be a form of counseling or treatment. We're not asking each of you, being in more of the HR field, to be those clinical experts. It's more so intending to offer hope through positive action, implementing some of those kind of a culture where, we are reducing that stigma, letting people know it is safe to talk about this, and then referring those individuals to those professionals in the community, or maybe even to the employee assistance program. So, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about some different myths and facts around suicide. So typically in a longer training, we would go through each one individually. I would bring a statement up, and the group would guess if they thought it was a myth or fact, and then we would have discussion about each one. For today's purposes, I'll just kind of go through each one a little bit quickly. So the first one is, no one can stop a suicide. It is inevitable. So according to the QPR Institute, this is a myth. And it's really our mindset around suicides being preventable, that there are actions that we can take to help prevent them. My caveat to that is suicides are still happening. Many of us may have lost a loved one. And so I do not want any of these statements to ever feel like an absolute. I would never want anyone to feel guilt or shame, or if there was more they could have done to help, save that person. We can't blame ourselves for like what we didn't know at that time. So I just want to throw that out there as well, that we don't want anyone to feel a certain way if they do have a lived experience. It's more so your mindset that, there are actions that we can do. We can educate ourselves, even like today, to help keep individuals safe. Second one is, if people in a crisis get the help they need, they may never be suicidal again. This one's always a little bit of a trickier one for individuals. And so many people do think that this is a fact or a myth, but it's actually a fact. And the fact behind that is that if I'm feeling suicidal, I get connected to help. I develop some coping skills. I'm doing a lot better. I get evidence-based treatment. A few years go by, maybe a significant life event happens. Maybe I'm diagnosed with something. Things aren't going well, and maybe I start to feel suicidal again. So just because someone is feeling suicidal once and they get better, they can feel suicidal again. It doesn't just happen once. And many people can also attempt more than one time as well. Typically, if someone does attempt suicide and it wasn't a completed suicide, the odds typically are that if they do reattempt, that they would utilize the same type of means. Asking a person about suicide will only make them angry and increase the risk of suicide. This is a really big myth, and the fact around it is that actually asking someone directly about suicidal intent lowers the anxiety, opens up communication, and lowers the risk of an attempt. Many individuals are fearful to ask an individual about suicide or their mental health for fear of what that response will be. And I'll just tell you, the odds are significantly higher that an individual will be relieved that you open the door for that conversation so that they can have a space to talk about what's going on. Many individuals are also fearful to ask someone about suicide for fear that they might put that idea into their head, and that is also false. If someone is thinking about suicide, they're already thinking about it. You're not going to put that idea into their head. So those are a couple points that I really want to hope hits home with each of you, this, to reduce some of that fear around asking about it. Only experts can prevent suicide. That is a myth. Again, that's why we are all here today, why we are trying to educate more individuals on this topic. Suicide prevention is everybody's business. We all play an important role. Again, we have all of our staff go through this training every single year, from our CEO, to our clinicians, to our direct support staff, to our administrative staff. Again, we all play a role. I also really empower our, direct support professionals. They spend a lot more time with the people that we serve, and they're on the front lines. They might be one of the first people to notice a change in behavior from someone that we serve, as opposed to maybe a licensed clinician who sees them, once a month for a med review or something like that. So again, just want to empower each of you that we all can play a role in this. People considering suicide keep their plans to themselves. This is also a myth. And so the fact around it is that most people considering suicide do actually communicate their intent prior to following through with that. And what I mean by this, again, it's not an absolute, but they communicate in a more subtle way or an action that maybe you aren't aware of until you kind of until you learn about them. So maybe they could start to give away some of their prized possessions. Maybe they start to, get some of their personal affairs, some paperwork in order. Maybe they even begin to acquire access to a lethal mean. That's a really, really big, important one. So kind of those more subtle actions that people might take that that are a little bit harder to notice sometimes. Those who talk about suicide do not do it. This also is a myth, and the fact around this one is that people who do talk about suicide may still try or even complete an act of self-destruction. And so the point with this one really is that just because someone might be talking about suicide, or quite frankly even joking about it, I know I've heard people joke about it, you probably have too, it's still really important to follow up on that, to ask about it, find out what's going on there, and to take it seriously. Once a person decides to complete suicide, there's nothing anyone can do to stop them. So again, kind of tying this all together with that myth, suicide is the most preventable kind of death, and almost any positive action may save a life. Again, some of the things that we're talking about might seem really small, but even just being a listening ear, offering hope, showing that you care when a person feels so hopeless and lonely, those kind of smaller actions can really help to make all the difference here. So how can each of you help? Okay, typically it has another sentence here, but that's okay. So how can each of you help? You can ask the question around suicide. So next we're going to talk about the various suicide clues and warning signs. It's really important to take all of these seriously. Again, some individuals may demonstrate clues to many people, to a few people, to no one. There's still a lot of ongoing research around that, and of course, every individual, every situation is different. The important piece is that the more signs that you observe, the greater the risk that that individual is. So there are 4 different categories here that we're going to walk through together. Again, on your little index card, on the, I guess depending which way they're flipped, on one side is some clues and warning signs that you can look for. Again, a really good tool for you to have. I brought a bunch with me in case you'd like to take any more. I can also send you more via mail or electronically. So the 4 different categories. The first category are the direct verbal clues. Okay, see, this is where it gets a little tough because I don't know which one's the last one before it switches. Okay, so these are the direct verbal clues. These are not very common. Typically, most individuals will not be as direct and verbally state these types of things to people. It's still very possible, but the point here being that this is not as common. A point I would just like to bring up briefly is, again, the importance of safer suicide prevention messaging. You probably have heard the terminology that person committed suicide. So that word committed. We're really trying to get away from that word. It's a really negative connotation, such as committing a crime, committing a sin. It's just out of respect for that individual and their loved ones. Moving forward, I would just encourage you all to say that person died by suicide. There's a lot of more information around that and other terminologies, but we'll just leave it for there today. But if it is something you're interested in learning more about, we could do a whole training on just safer messaging around suicide prevention and really mental health as a whole. And again, those are really important pieces that you can build into your organization around the culture of mental health and creating a safer and open conversation around this topic. The next category are these indirect verbal clues. So these, again, these will be a little bit more common, but they are more subtle. So it's important to kind of notice these and follow up on them. So for example, if you and a colleague are, leaving a long shift at work for the day, your colleague might say, I might say, that was a really long shift. Your colleague might say, yeah, that was pretty rough. Like, I don't know, I can't go on. I just want out. Hopefully, if someone were to say something similar to that, some alarms or alerts might go off in your head, and you might want to, follow up on that and say, what do you mean you can't go on? What do you mean you just want out? So kind of following up with an open-ended question, restating what they said. And depending on the response will depend if you do need to go into the question, persuade, refer 3 steps, or if you don't. Really, again, kind of trusting your gut feeling there and following, as appropriate. But again, that's just kind of one example of what that might look like. Okay, these are the behavioral clues. So kind of similar to what we talked about previously. These are some kind of those subtle actions again, or behaviors that an individual might be exhibiting if they are thinking about suicide. So again, maybe getting some of their personal affairs in order, maybe giving away some prized possessions. A really big and important one I want to touch upon for a moment here is the second one. So acquiring access to a lethal mean. So many of you might be parents. Sorry, I only have 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna be running out of time too. But this is really important. So not even just for parents, but for anyone, if access to mental health care services is a really big issue, and it's something outside of today's topic, but it's important to address. And so say someone that you do know is feeling suicidal, and you want to connect them to help, but there's a 6-week waiting list at an inpatient psych hospital. That's just the reality. So when parents ask me, my child's feeling suicidal, I can't get them in anywhere, what is the one thing I can do right now? The biggest thing you can do is reduce access to those lethal means temporarily during this time of crisis and suicidal ideation. So maybe it is, locking a gun up. Maybe it is, getting the medications outside of the house, or, limiting the supply that's readily available. Really doing a sweep of the house to keep those individuals safe. The amount of time and distance that we have between an individual and a lethal mean during this time of crisis can be the difference between life and death. If an individual is thinking about suicide and, for example, the gun is locked up, the gun's not in the house, those additional extra steps are additional time for them to be thinking more when they are kind of in this crisis, especially with younger kids. There's such a big impulsivity that goes with that. They're not thinking that this is a permanent action they're completing. Really important for safety. Again, just temporarily during the time of crisis. Even if, there's a lot of places with gun locks out there, but if you don't have access to that, you can even put it, in a freezer and freeze it. And then it takes even longer for that to obviously defrost. So those are just my 2 cents on that. Really, really important. Situational clues, these are related to that slide earlier with these significant life events that an individual might be going through that may lead them to think about suicide. So, because I only know I have a few minutes left here, the question part, this is the hardest part of the entire piece, is asking the question about suicide. Asking the individual, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about, killing yourself? Some tips here, if you are concerned about someone, ask them. If you don't feel comfortable asking them, find someone else who can. Again, it's more about you opening up the conversation, giving yourself plenty of time, make sure that you have your resources handy. How you ask the question is less important than that you just ask it. If this is something that you're maybe a little bit more uncomfortable with, open the door here with the less direct approach at first. Have you been unhappy lately? Do you ever wish you go to sleep and never wake up? But it is important when it feels comfortable in the conversation to get to the direct approach. We really need to make sure that both parties are on the same page. We are specifically talking about suicidality here. Even self-harm is a different concept than suicide. These are on the other side of your index card, all of these example questions, again, as a resource. Next, you're going to want to persuade someone to stay alive. So really this goes into a little bit more deeper of the conversation. Again, we've all persuaded someone to try to do something. So again, it's listening to the problem, remembering suicide's not the problem here, only the solution to a perceived insoluble problem, and not rushing to judgment. So again, really offering hope in any form, asking things like, will you go with me to get help? What can we do to keep you safe right now? And then we want to refer them to help. Again, suicidal people often believe they cannot be helped, so you may have to do more. You have to be really persistent with this. They might say no at first. Again, maybe asking the question in a different way. It's really important your tone in this conversation, creating a safe space. The best referral, taking that person directly to someone who can help. That might not always be the situation. The next is getting a commitment from them, then making those arrangements. The third is giving them referral information, for example, that mental health brochure that each of you have, and trying to get a good faith commitment from them. I wish we had a lot more time here. In the full training, we go into way more detail, way more examples of that. But just to close out here, since almost all efforts to persuade someone to live instead of attempt suicide will be met with agreement and relief, I just empower you to take action and don't hesitate to get involved or take the lead. So I will end it there, and I'll just keep some resources up here for a moment. And thank you all so much again for your time today, and I'll be back to answer any questions in just a little bit. Thank you.
Alrighty, everybody, we are going to go ahead and get started. For anybody who still needs to grab a refreshment or run to the restroom, again, feel free to do that at any point. We are going to have one more quick 5-minute break later on before we start the roundtable and open it up for questions. But we are going to get started here with the Peckham team. For our next presentation, we have Sarah and Emily joining us. Sarah's role as Director for Mission Initiatives provides strategic thinking and clinical expertise in the design, implementation, and evaluation of programs and services that support Peckham's mission. For more than 20 years, she has provided leadership and professional development to vocational rehabilitation professionals responsible for eligibility, onboarding, career development, and employee relations for people with disabilities and other barriers to employment. Emily has been working in the field of vocational rehabilitation, I can't say that 10 times fast, for over 10 years in public, private, and nonprofit sectors. She currently serves as the Director of Vocational Services at Peckham, where she leads a team of vocational rehabilitation professionals working with youth and adults with disabilities. Emily is a certified rehabilitation counselor, a licensed professional counselor, and has a passion for guiding employers to include people with disabilities in their diversity and inclusion initiatives. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Peckham.
Thank you.
Thank
We'd
you.
like to add that we're both Spartans. Go green.
Yes, go green.
Thank you.
And also, sorry, I didn't realize we were submitting our short bios, so I'm really not that fancy. Go ahead. So I'm Emily, like Taylor mentioned, and this is
And I'm Sarah.
yes, as you can
just
see.
respond to whatever. So, yell out to us. We want this presentation to be interactive. I mean, we have information to share with you, but we also want to kind of get a pulse of what's happening within your organizations. So we hope that you'll feel comfortable kind of talking to us as we go through the presentation.
Yeah, and just a caveat, really, I'm very casual. We're both very casual, off the cuff. We want to normalize the mental health and wellness experience for all of us. And so that's kind of the lens we're going to take moving forward through this presentation. So how many of you have heard of Peckham Incorporated? We got one.
Hey.
How have you heard about us?
Oh, cool.
Awesome.
And there was one more hand, somebody else.
Oh,
a couple.
yeah. How have you guys heard about us?
Oh, sweet.
Oh, cool.
Cool.
Well, we'll tell you a little bit about Peckham. Did you want to?
Go ahead.
Okay. So Peckham, we're pretty unique. So we're a mix of a nonprofit, or we are a nonprofit agency, and we're a mix of a business and human services agency. And so our mission is to employ people with disabilities on one of our 5 lines of business. So we have, we produce apparel for the U.S. government. We manufacture apparel. We have custodial services where we're cleaning over like 8 million square feet of space every day. We clean the state government buildings in downtown Lansing. We have business services line of business where we're doing call center work and IT help desk work for the government, so USDA. We actually have a call center here in Grand Rapids off of 28th Street where we're doing logistics for USDA. That was 3. We have our supply chain and logistics division where we have material handling jobs. We do third-party logistics for the government, storing clothing and organizational equipment. And then we have a farm, pretty small enterprise, but it allows us to be creative in the way that we do farming, and we sell locally. We get our programs through what's called our jobs through what's called Ability One contracts. So we have to maintain a 75% disabled labor ratio. So that means 75% of our workforce has to be people with documented disabilities. It says here, we work, so that is our line of business section. Then we have our human services component where we have over 30 different programs that are helping youth and adults with disability find or maintain employment or build pre-employment skills. We also have section that works with our with adjudicated youth and helping them obtain their GED and get work experience along the way. What else did I miss?
I mean, we work with a lot of marginalized groups, and when we look at our direct labor workforce, the largest disability category that we serve are people that have mental illness. About 50% of the people that we employ or provide services to have a mental illness of some type. And when we talk about Peckham and when we bring in examples, we might talk about staff and team members. So it's helpful to kind of let you know the difference between the two. Like Emily and I are staff at Peckham. We're in a support role, supporting our workforce, our direct labor workforce, people that have disabilities or other barriers to employment who are receiving services, but also they're there to work in a paid job with benefits. So staff have some sort of support role or are running the operations side of the business or doing HR or finance, those sort of things to keep the business model at Peckham, the social enterprise, running. So we sometimes we'll talk about team members and staff, but for the most part, when we're talking about well-being and mental health, our initiatives are the same across our team member and staff workforces, with the exception of the fact that we have some clinical staff like Emily and I and our teams that provide some more clinical type services and case management to people that have disabilities and other barriers. So that's really the only distinction, is that we don't have a case manager necessarily at
No.
Peckham.
I
and our
mean,
team members
I got a
do.
therapist. I do, and we're going to talk about that, how to normalize having a therapist, and it's okay to talk about it. But yeah, that's kind of the distinction there. And then we also, a large portion of what we do at Peckham is we work with local employers to help educate them on employing people with disabilities, and also connecting with them to see if they would be a good match for some of our programs who are working to place people into jobs.
Okay, ready to dive in.
We're ready to dive in.
Yeah.
I don't know where to stand.
Over there.
I'm gonna
Do you want
do
your notes over there, or do you want me to come over there?
No, I'll do this.
Okay.
I don't. Okay.
Okay, go back.
Ah,
Go, girl, you're giving it all away.
this is, oh my God. What's
Okay, here, let's stop here.
Okay.
You guys have already listened to a lot of conversation today about mental health, and come in with your own experience, your own life experience, your own personal experiences with people that you know, and maybe even educational and work experience around mental health. So I want to know from you, when you think of the words mental health, when you think of that term, what pops into your mind first? Just shout it out. When somebody says, we're going to talk about mental health, what do you think about? Disability? Stability. Okay.
Mm. No wrong answers.
No wrong answers.
We want to hear the wild answers.
Depression and anxiety. The most common answers that we get when we ask this question. Depression and anxiety. Anything else that pops into your mind? Suicide, right? You just learned a lot about suicide prevention. So suicide, crisis, people in crisis comes to mind. Stress, burnout. So often when we think about mental health, we do frame it in terms of illness. We often think about mental illness. That's usually where we go, or somebody being in crisis. And we forget sometimes about the health part of mental health. And that health is more than the absence of illness. That there's a whole range of colors that we're going to explore today in between mentally ill and mentally healthy. And I want you guys to consider this definition, which I'll read for you and for the people that are on line. This is a World Health Organization definition of mental health. It says it's a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So here we're making a shift toward a state of well-being. We're talking about functioning well. We're talking about contributing to society and our community. And if you're on the World Health Organization's website, this definition goes on to say that mental health is more than the absence of mental disorders. It is an integral part of health, and that there is no health without mental health. The next slide that we want to show you is kind of this continuum, a dimensional model, where we're thinking about mental health, again, as less of a binary. So we're not thinking about mental health as either being mentally ill or being mentally healthy, but recognizing the fact that there are many dimensions that fall in between being in crisis or having suicidal ideation and excelling. And what we live in today in this binary model around mental health is necessitated to some extent by our medical model, meaning that we need to qualify sometimes for a diagnosis in order to qualify for treatment. So certainly there is a need to have this criteria for having a mental illness so that we are able to capture the need for treatment. But what we want to do, and what we believe is a really positive approach for the workplace, is to think about a model that promotes positive well-being, that looks at preventive measures, and that is protective of our positive mental health. So let's go to the next slide. Okay. When we think about these different dimensions of mental health, from being in crisis, struggling, surviving, thriving, and excelling, where do you think most people land? Surviving? Anyone think it's different? Thriving? So there've been a few studies that have looked at this. A study, and I'm going to use a pre-pandemic study because I think the pandemic has sent us all a little bit lower on this scale. But a pre-pandemic study that it was a United States study that was published, and it looked at the words they used were a little bit different. The scale that they used ended in flourishing instead of excelling, but the rest of the model was pretty much the same. And in that study, 57% of the population studied were in surviving with a little bit of thriving. So it's important to note that these are not distinct categories. The surveys, when there are some surveys you can actually administer to yourself so that you can, some reliable, valid surveys so that you can check in with yourself in terms of where you fall on this continuum. But they tend to ask more days than not. Questions like every day or most days of the week, do you feel this way, right? So we can be mostly in surviving with a little bit of thriving, like a couple days a week, but we're mostly living in surviving. And so in the study, 57% of the people were surviving, you're right, and with a little bit of thriving. Yeah, and 17% of the people were in the flourishing category. So there was, I think that's a pretty good percentage of people that feel like they're really excelling or flourishing. And then the remainder of the people were struggling or in crisis. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, the people that were struggling or in crisis here in a minute. I want to go through a little bit some definitions of the model. I mean, just looking a little bit at where we fall when we're in these categories. And I want to start by looking at that surviving category, since that's where a lot of people find themselves. And I think if you were to survey your own workforce, you might find that people are in the surviving section, especially after the pandemic. I'd say I certainly can reflect on my own mental health that I slipped during the pandemic. I am somebody who thinks about my own mental well-being using this type of a dimensional model, and I'm very protective of my mental health. I do have a mental health diagnosis. I have an anxiety disorder and depression. And so when I'm able to use my strategies and supports to get into a place where I feel like I'm thriving with a little bit of excelling, which is where I feel like I usually am. I can't say that I live in the excelling box, in the bright green box, but when I feel like I can get into the thriving with a little bit of excelling, I'm very protective of my mental health and want to protect against any loss. And I certainly felt myself deeply rooted in surviving with a little bit of struggling during the pandemic. So I started to have panic attacks again, which I hadn't had for like 5 or 6 years. So, you know, I think sometimes when we present and talk about this model, you can think about it in terms of how you want to support your workforce, but a lot of us reflect on ourselves too. And we're thinking, where do I fall? Where's my mental health? And start to think about strategies that you might use to try to promote more positive mental health. So when surviving, you can see here that we are starting to destabilize a little bit when we're struggling. When we're surviving. It's like we're making it, we're probably making it to work, we're able to perform our job, but our internal experience is one where we have a lot of worry, we have irritability, we may have trouble concentrating, we might be feeling sad and blue, we're starting to have trouble sleeping, we might start to have kind of different changes in our appetite and in our ability or desire to connect with other people, both at work and outside of work.
And I just want to clarify too, if it wasn't clear, this is with or without a mental health diagnosis.
We're going to talk about that next.
Any and all folks could be on this continuum at any point in time, whether you have a diagnosis or not.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you guys in a minute where you think people with a diagnosis fall. So if we go one step up into thriving, you can see that we're starting to really feel well and function better. We have less anxiety, we're feeling more calm, we're able to eat and sleep normally, we have a desire and an ability to connect positively with coworkers, to connect with our friends, to socialize outside of work. And, you know, kind of our kind of basic self-care activities like getting exercise and sleeping enough and paying attention to what we eat, so we're nurturing ourselves, those are all like in a pretty solid state. A lot of people have questions about, you know, the difference between the light green and the dark green, like moving into excelling. And the best way that I can describe excelling based on, you know, what I've read, because I told you I don't really feel like I live in the excelling phase very much, but the excelling stage for a lot of people feels like they're really in flow. Like when we're talking about work, these are the people who have tons of energy. They're feeling really like they have the ability to stretch themselves, to reach goals, to get outside of their comfort zone. So excelling is not a stage where people feel like they're just really content and comfortable, and I go to work and I do my job and I go home and I watch TV, my Netflix, and I feel like I'm just really good. Excelling is really where people feel like they can grow, where they feel like they have this desire and the energy and the ambition to really express their interests. They have a strong sense of purpose. They have really this idea that they are starting to meet their fullest potential. And from a workplace perspective, I mean, the more people that we have in the light green and the dark green, right, this is good for our employees as humans, but it's also good for the bottom line at work. When people are in these light green and dark green areas, they're more productive, they have better ideas, they really can go after big projects and really be contributing members of your organization. So it's certainly important that we focus on trying to promote strategies, which we'll talk about later, that help people, all people, as Emily said, get into the light green and the dark green. Okay, so next slide, we focus in a little bit more on people who are in the orange and red, people who are struggling and in crisis. And so here I want to ask you kind of if you recognize that there might be people in your organization that fall into the struggling or in crisis dimensions here. We have a system at Peckham where when people are starting to recognize, whether they're team members or staff at Peckham, that they're struggling or in crisis, that they know how to reach out for support internally and externally. You guys just did a training that we utilize regularly at Peckham, QPR. And so when people are truly in crisis, sometimes within an organization, they want to know how they can reach out for help. One of the ways that we approach people who are in crisis, if they're in a place where they're reaching out for support at Peckham, is through a crisis support team. So we have a team of people who have been trained in QPR and another suicide prevention training called ASSIST. And that's a way that we encourage people to say, it's okay to be at a place where you're starting to feel like you're in crisis, because we have support internally that's safe and confidential, and we can help direct you to services that you need. In the struggling, though, area, I mean, this is where we really need to start taking action. And we have this, when we think back to that binary approach, where we're really trained to think like, I'm not going to pay attention or do anything until it's really bad, right? With our health and with our mental health, physical health and mental health. We don't often go to the doctor until we feel like crap. We don't reach out for counseling until we're really in distress and we feel like we've exhausted all of our natural coping mechanisms. So as employers and coworkers, employees, we're going to talk a little bit about how we can train our organizations, the people, the humans within our organizations, to notice when we ourselves might be dipping into a struggling or a crisis zone, and also when our coworkers or the people we supervise or manage are starting to exhibit signs of anxiety, depression, performance challenges, withdrawal, social withdrawal. I mean, there are cues that we can tune into to notice when somebody is struggling before they get to crisis, before they're in red, before they get to crisis, so that we can be a first line of intervention, so that we can create a culture at our workplaces where people feel that they have the support and the connection to reach out for help, to try to avoid scenarios where people are showing up in crisis. For the most part, there are strategies that we can employ, both individually, to notice when you're starting to slip down the spectrum here, but also to support other people and to give factual observations about what you're seeing in the workplace to your coworkers or people that you supervise to help them notice that you're seeing behavioral concerns and that you want to support them in whatever way you can. And because the truth is, I don't know for any of you, I let you know already that I have anxiety and depression. When I'm starting to struggle, and certainly at times in my life, if I felt like I'm in crisis, it can be the hardest time to actually reach out for help. So you're so distressed and just taking care of your kids and making it to work or just getting out of bed some days can be really hard. So thinking about organizing yourself. Emily and I talk all the time about our own, therapy struggles of finding a match. Like if you haven't been connected to a therapist and you find yourself in a position or where you yourself need to get some help, it can feel daunting, right? And so, so we want to be able to notice signs and be able to help ourselves, but also help others. Okay, next question is, where do we think, is there another slide?
Yeah,
Where do we think
sorry, I was
people-
afraid to turn it
That's
because I
all
didn't
right.
want to give away the answer.
No, I know. Where do we think people with a diagnosed mental illness fall on the spectrum? Where do you think? Struggling? Orange? Surviving? Wait, 2. What were you going to say? Depends. Same that you said, kind of across the board. Yeah. So the truth is that, as Emily alluded to earlier, people with a diagnosed mental health condition can fall anywhere on this spectrum. It is true that in order to achieve a diagnosis, at some point you were struggling or in crisis. You met criteria for a diagnosis, right? So people that have a diagnosed mental health condition of any kind have had enough symptoms to be struggling or in crisis at one point. But this is not a static condition, right? Our mental health is very fluid. So all of us can change position over time on this continuum. And people with mental illness are no different. And what we want to do is promote approaches at work. I would say in our communities and schools, like this is a public health approach to mental health, where we are encouraging everyone, regardless of having a diagnosed mental health condition, to work toward these higher levels of mental well-being. So designating who has a mental illness and who doesn't have a mental illness when we're thinking about workplace mental health and workplace well-being programs really is not important, because what we want are strategies that apply to all. Things that all managers can do, things that all individual contributors and employees can do, and things that HR professionals can do to build a culture at your organization that supports employee well-being, including mental well-being.
And if I could jump in, we talk a lot about visible and invisible disabilities, right? So we know that if you have an invisible disability, that could mean that you have a mental health diagnosis. We also know that if you have a visible physical disability or a medical condition like diabetes or, difficulty with one of your limbs, that can impact your mental health, right? So mental health spans across disability, no disability. We all have minds and we all have energy and we're all exposed to different stressors. And you can fall on that continuum whether you're in any of those groups. And in fact, if your mental well-being is not in a good place, it can exacerbate a lot of your physical issues, as we know. So that's why we like to shape it this way. And I'll just give a quick example. When we are working with employers who want to start working with people with disabilities, right? They've got in their mind like a person in a wheelchair, a Down syndrome person, all these visible physical disabilities, right? And they say to us, well, how do I work with somebody with autism? How do I work with somebody with X diagnosis, right? We take the same approach, whether we're talking about physical disabilities or mental disabilities. You just work with the person, and we're all on the spectrum, and let's do what makes sense for everyone to be in a positive, healthy environment.
Well said.
You want to kick this off, or you want me to?
Well, we'll both jump in here.
Okay.
So this slide has some statistics around kind of our nation's current workplace landscape. And this is from the US Surgeon General's website. But they've pulled statistics. They've done a survey of workplaces essentially and pulled some statistics that we think are important to share. One is that 76% of US workers reported at least one symptom of a mental health condition. And this is from a 2021 report. 84% of respondents said their workplace conditions had contributed to at least one mental health challenge. And 81% of workers reported that they will be looking for workplaces that support mental health in the future. I mean, if we learned anything through the pandemic, it's that we all value our health and our mental health and want to protect it. And we've heard from many current employees at Peckham, but also from people who are applying for jobs at Peckham, that having a job that protects their mental health is a priority for them. So I don't know if you guys are hearing that within your own workforce. Let us ask maybe, have there been any shifts within your own workplaces, especially since the pandemic, where people seem like they're talking more about mental health, they're caring more about mental health and protecting their own mental health? I see some heads nodding. Anybody want to share what that looks like?
I've been in the HR role on my company for almost 2 years, and I don't know if it's just me being in that role that people feel really comfortable, but I've noticed, like, seriously, even just like towards the end of 2022 to now, it's been like are people in my office like literally almost every single day saying they're struggling. Thankfully, we have an employee assistance program that I can refer them to, but it's like, and I don't know if it's because I'm also very open, like I have anxiety and depression, and I love therapy, so I'm very open to talking about it.
You can come on up.
So I think it's just maybe less than it has been in the past, and like our company is led by millennials who strongly believe like mental health is a very real thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's it or what.
Well, I think you hit on some important points. I mean, one is that it could be generational. I do think people are just talking about it more. There's more of a public forum around mental health since the pandemic, where a lot of people have come out and disclosed that they struggled during the pandemic with their own mental health. I mean, like people we look up to, like famous people and politicians and leaders at our own companies have been more open about it. But I do think generationally that our younger generations in the workplace right now are more protective of their well-being, more interested in achieving balance between their work life and their pursuits of leisure and just having balance outside of work. So, I mean, you kind of come from a unique environment where you have maybe primarily millennials working in your organization. Some of you come from organizations like ours where we have like all the generations mixed in. So we hear different priorities from different people. But I do think there's more of an open discussion with some of our younger employees, and also clearly prioritizing mental health. Like, this is what good at setting boundaries. Like, some of our younger employees are really good at setting boundaries and to protect themselves and to protect their well-being.
And we say this, we know that a lot, like we all have businesses to run, right? We're not saying like, make your workplaces super easy and fun and don't make your quotas, right? No, we know that the reality is a business is business, and we all have hard work to do. But are you providing a space for people to feel comfortable and express when they are falling towards the orange and red in that continuum? We know that stress can be good stress and bad stress, right? And so even if I'm super excited about this project that I'm working on and I'm pulling 10-hour days, that's still going to have a stressful impact on my body and my mind. And how do I balance that? And who can I talk to if I need to pull in extra support?
We think workplace is a great place to do kind of this public health approach to mental health too, because it's where we spend so much time. I think schools are a great place to attend to youth mental health, and there's a lot more emphasis being put on youth mental health in our school districts, and resources and like different strategies. And for adults, that's the workplace. This is where we spend time. We as employers benefit from having a healthier workforce, but also we as employees certainly benefit. And I think we all have agency here in our workplaces to say, you know what, this is important to me, and I want to be part of a solution that's going to improve the culture around well-being or mental health at my workplace.
And sometimes just being at work is something that is positively mentally healthy. Like, I was on maternity leave this fall, and I was like, all right, when am I going to get back to work? Because my mental health is going down the drain, right? So we don't want to make this like rosy picture that like work is, so terrible and we have to figure out how to fix it, but making space to talk about things. And so we came up with a few strategies. Talk about it. Strategy number 1 is to just talk about it, right? What are our leaders doing to, again, make space for talking about mental health at work? And tell me what this statistic is.
This statistic is another survey that looked at respondents in 2021 were talking about this was the 2023 survey. So they were comparing 2021, 22, and 2023, how much their organization was talking about mental health. Right. So there's been growth. In 2021, these respondents, and there were about 1,000 people that responded, said about 28% of their organizations were talking about mental health, and now more than half are openly talking about mental health.
And what we wanted to share specifically on this topic is building in a top-down approach, right? So you're not going to have a bunch of leaders going and saying, take care of your mental health, do X, Y, Z. But then when you look and see who your hard workers are, right, they're not taking care of their mental health. They're burning the candle at both ends. So instilling that from the top down, showing people that it's okay to talk about it if you need to talk about building in flexibility and what that can look like in your specific employment setting. Something that we do is, we share a lot about our physical health, right? We know when somebody's got to go have knee surgery. We know when somebody's having XYZ done. But we aren't always talking about that mental health piece. And so just being transparent with your team about, hey, if you need to take a mental health day, or if you need to, flex your schedule this week, that's possible. So just kind of being open to talking about it and using appropriate language, right? So I was hesitating on talking about this with this group because I don't want people to feel scared that you're going to say the wrong thing. But there's 2 words that I want to share with you all that I think could be unintentionally harmful in certain situations. So the 2 words are crazy and lazy. It's hard not to say crazy and lazy. It's hard. But oftentimes, and I'll start with lazy first, lazy's, in my opinion, is not a personal characteristic. I believe it's a symptom. And I believe that when you look at someone and deem them lazy, it's because there's something else going on, right? Maybe they have unaddressed mental health concerns. Maybe they just switched their medicine to help with their anxiety, and it's making them super drowsy that first week. Maybe they have poor work attachment because they have a learning disability and have never been able to positively attach to an institution like school or work, right? There's something else there. Crazy, I say crazy all the time. I started using the word wild instead, like, oh, that's wild. Because, right, like, what does crazy really mean? It means that somebody is going crazy. They're unhinged. They have, not a lot of control over their mental capacity and their thoughts, right? That's one where it's like, I'm just giving it to you guys, food for thought. But there are things that I think, if I just spent, 2 weeks ago, I had to go into the hospital for postpartum depression, right? It didn't, but I could have. And somebody's coming in and be like, man, you're acting a little crazy, right? Be like, crazy? You should have saw the people on the unit with me. Like, I had to go in and address myself, right? It's a
sensitive term for
it's a sensitive term.
Have lived experience with mental illness. So finding a replacement is helpful.
Yeah.
Sometimes when people are like, that was so crazy, I just ask, what do you mean? crazy is a catch-all. Was it stressful? Was it busy? Was it demanding? Like, tell me what that means, because I don't even know anymore what crazy means when people start using that word. So I just kind of challenge people to be more specific, because that certainly can be a word that.
And we're not the PC police. This is just food for thought.
Yeah.
So you skipped strategy 2, which was kind of going in. So strategy 2 is increasing your mental health literacy and building competencies at work. So what you're doing right now, coming to summits about mental health.
I got QPR training already.
Wait, are you like officially trained? You got like.
I got most of it.
Oh, yeah. QPR training. There's training such as connectivity and conversations. And then one thing that we really promote at Peckham is mental health first aid. How many of you have heard of mental health first aid? 1, 2.
Is anyone trained in it? Did their training in mental health
1.
first aid? That would make sense that you would have mental health first aid certification.
So we know how to treat somebody with a cut or how to put a splint on when there's a physical injury. But what do we do in those moments of crisis to help individuals get the support that they need? What are some of the warning signs? And Sarah can talk about it a lot more because she is an actual certified trainer. But this is usually offered for free at the local community mental health organizations.
Like ours offers it for $15 for
Yeah.
a full 8-hour training with certification.
And what it does is it helps build confidence. So if you are at the gas station and you see somebody who's having what appears to be a panic attack, right? Thank you. I was going to go way in the left field. You felt it. You felt it. I was going to go real wild. They're having a panic attack, right? What can you do in that moment to assist? Do you just say like, "Oop, hope you can catch your breath. See you later," right? What are some of the warning signs and how can we help that? So we highly recommend mental health first aid. All of our manufacturing, all of our supervisors on our lines of business, in the lines, working in the shipping and receiving, everybody is trained.
I mean, corporate kind of leadership support helps with this initiative. We had a leadership initiative to train all staff, especially if you have supervisory responsibilities or case management responsibilities in mental health first aid. And we have over 575 staff who have the certification that work for us. And it's become like a healthy competition. One of our business lines is at 100%. And so he's always like pushing the other business lines, like all my supervisors, 100%. We maintain 100% certification. So there's some, healthy competition, but it certainly helps that it's highly encouraged, and that the team, if there's a metric around it, right? So if we don't set metrics sometimes around these initiatives, then they kind of just fall away, or it's a great idea, but it's hard to implement.
And one thing we want to say here, I know we only have a few minutes left, but obviously we all have our own cultures in our workplace, right? We're not saying go in tomorrow and suggest all these wild ideas. Now I'm saying wild a lot. It's like stuck in my brain. Do what makes sense for your culture. Take those bite-sized chunks, start addressing it, and put essentially your money where your mouth is, and don't just let it be one of those projects that only pops up in May, right? Start assessing your own culture and figure out, what does stress management look like in this culture? Do people have to be on the phones all day? Is it really difficult for them to get off the phones? Yeah, it is. So what can stress management look like? And we encourage you to, instead of just guessing, get the focus groups in, get your individuals, pull them off the line and say, hey, here's the reality of what the workday looks like. What would be helpful to you to help manage that stress on a daily or weekly or monthly basis?
How many of you do a pulse survey of any kind that asks about well-being or mental health? Kind of. I see you saying kind of. Because there are some survey questions that are out there that are not asking people to disclose, about their mental health conditions, but that are more of a pulse survey around the culture and how their mental well-being is being supported. That it can be helpful to build into existing surveys that you have, or to do your own. I mean, as a separate initiative to bring that in. And that's, I guess, a good segue into.
It is a good segue. And now I'm thinking of all these types of things I want to say. I want to just say you can have a neutral conversation about mental health without outing someone, right? So you can check in and say, how is your stress level? Or I noticed in that meeting, you were really disengaged. Let's talk about that, right? You're not digging to find a diagnosis. You're just digging to figure out what's stemming and creating these symptoms. And that can lead into an open conversation. So strategy number 4, hard segue here, is include mental health well-being in your employee wellness programs at work. So there's a ton of initiatives, right? We'll pay for your gym membership. We'll pay for, if you walk this amount of miles, you'll get this amount of money, right? How can we infuse mental health benefits and well-being into that? Could it be paying for a Headspace app subscription for a year? Could it be incentivizing stretch breaks, incentivizing meditation
for people who want that? Not everybody wants meditation, but for some people, mindfulness and meditation is something that they want at work.
Mm-hmm. And then one thing I will say about EAP, which we kind of mentioned, sure, I think we're all required to have EAP.
Does anyone have an EAP, an employee assistance program? So your employees know how to access an external professional short-term therapy situation if they need it. Because I don't know if it's required to have an EAP. That's a good question.
It's not?
No.
Oh.
I mean, should be. Put it on the should be list, but certainly I don't think that's a required benefit. And, we keep kind of discussing what the best EAP approach is because utilization continues to be so low with our EAP.
And knowing that just because you have an EAP doesn't mean it's a good one, right? We all have a joke at Peckham, like we're like so happy and about well-being, but like nobody really likes our EAP therapists. Like they're like, all right, go there for your 6 sessions and find somebody better, right? But that's important to know, right? Mm-hmm. Do your staff even like the therapists or counselors that they have on staff? So it's just trying to naturalize what everybody has, normalize what everybody has going on.
I just want to add to that we do think it's worth going back and asking for feedback around EAP services if you have one. Because we are just starting to really, and I think people are just starting to talk more about their mental health and saying, you know what, that's not helpful. Like, it's great we have this EAP that we have, but I actually haven't gotten good services there. People are just starting to bring that out more recently. And so we have a team that I'm on right now with our HR department and some of our more clinical staff to start to go and evaluate other options. And some of them are virtual. Like there are some companies now who are standing themselves up as alternatives to an EAP that offer a full comprehensive package. And a lot of our employees are saying, I prefer virtual to a face-to-face meeting with somebody who I don't find very helpful to me. So, I mean, we're kind of in a phase right now where we're thinking about moving away from the EAP that we have. And it just takes time to evaluate what's right for you and to get an idea from your employee base.
So just to wrap us up, related to the upskill managers strategy, and since you're all HR professionals, how many of you have been in a role where you're like, I think this is what I'm supposed to do with my job. I'm going to try it. I didn't really get the best training. I'm going to just keep moving. That can be a really stressful situation, right? So as managers, providing role clarity, making sure people understand the guidelines of where they can perform. When you say you're a flexible workplace, what does that mean? When you say you're a hybrid workplace, does that really mean you expect your employee to be on for 10 hours a day instead of 8, right? Providing that clarity around the work environment can help lower those stress levels. Sometimes we've had job descriptions that have literally been in the queue for like 15, 20 years. I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, right? But updating the descriptions, updating expectations so that confusion isn't a point of stress for your new hires or your existing hires who think they're in the job that they've been working for 20 years, but really you need them to do X, Y, Z. We also just want to encourage that managers are modeling healthy behavior and workplace. What's
like do what I say,
yeah,
do what I do kind of thing. Like we have some managers that we've been working with at Peckham, who are really good at telling their employees to take care of themselves, but then they are the ones that are sending emails at 10 o'clock at night and
contacting
taking a
you,
vacation.
contacting you when you're on PTO,
Yeah.
you know, doing these things. Say, you know, I yell at my husband all the time because I'm like, you're on PTO, why are you working? Like, you're on PTO. So setting those boundaries, setting those expectations with your staff, incentivizing, boundary setting, and, you know,
And we think
keeping to
framing
your
it
word.
as for managers, it can be helpful to frame it as protecting people's well-being, that, you know, we know you're working hard and you need to send that email out, but there are simple strategies so that you can delay that email so it gets sent at 8 a.m. tomorrow. So you're
started
not
doing
adding
that.
stress, because we're trying to protect the well-being of your team. Sometimes a reframe like that can be helpful for managers who are just those workers. They're going to be the ones that work all night. Like, we're not going to stop that from happening. That's their choice. But they need to.
What is the
understand
impact
the
on others?
on their team, and framing it around well-being and trying to protect well-being has been a message that's landed well with some managers.
And then finally, just encouraging your managers and staff to have the conversation around temperature checks. That's what we're calling mental health check-ins, right? When you're meeting in your 30 for 30s with your staff, it's okay to have a temperature check and say, how are you doing? You know, how can I support you better? What are areas of tension or stress for you that I can help with? Because we know that those are a lot of times what's exacerbating mental health symptoms in the workplace. So all in all, we know that mental health is a journey. We all fall somewhere on the spectrum at any point in time, at any point in the hour. We could be somewhere on that spectrum. Sarah and I are on the road a lot giving this type of advice to folks. If you ever need to reach out to us, our contact's there. You're all more than welcome to come visit Peckham and Lansing. I was commenting to Taylor, hey, you have windows. Light is a huge way to impact mental health if you have access to light. So good job. We like to do that at Peckham as well, too.
We have a lot of design elements. We worked actually with an architecture firm here in Grand Rapids, Integrated Architecture. But when we met with them, we had them come and do town hall meetings with all of our employees and team members and community members to say, when we were building a new headquarters, what do we want this to look and feel like? And there was a lot of conversation then around supporting mental health.
Yep.
And how can we design a building that supports our mental well-being? And so we have a lot of design elements in our building that are specifically built that way to support mental health.
We could talk for like 4 more hours, but Taylor's like creeping in. So we're going to stop. Thank you guys for your attention. We appreciate you all. I have COVID, by the way.
Awesome. All right, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started just with a roundtable sort of discussion. We are going to open it up for questions shortly after. So I really just have a couple things that I wanted the whole group to give their input on. But again, we're hoping that you have some questions that you maybe piece together throughout the presentation. The first one, we've talked a lot about the prevalence of mental health in the workplace. One of the biggest things that we get asked about here at OVD comes to how do we get engaged with those who are working remotely. So we're seeing a lot more companies switch to a hybrid model or folks who are fully remote. So the question really is, how do we translate as HR professionals into servicing and supporting those who aren't in the office every day?
Good question. Who wants to answer?
Don't fight over it.
I work hybrid. I think during COVID, a lot of us came up with like really impulsive ways to connect. Like, oh my God, let's do a murder mystery night on Tuesday. Like, I miss everyone. And then we didn't get a real cadence to the kind of face-to-face connections that we needed to have that were non-meetings. But I think we all could recognize that having some space for our people who especially work fully remotely to engage with people socially was really important. And some of our remote employees have felt that it's comfortable for them to come in, have some sort of cadence where they come in and have face-to-face connection with people, at least come to events. We have a lot of events where people can come in at like parties and volunteer events where people can come in and have some face-to-face connection. But we have some employees who are fully remote, who work in other cities or states. And so one strategy has been to try to have some time for social connection. because like, especially if you're somebody who does like virtual platform meetings, Zoom or Teams, it's like you get on, you talk, you're right down to business, you get off, everybody disconnects and they're disappearing off the screen. So there, it can be a little bit difficult. So one example is one of it's our leadership team meeting where we have people that work in all different areas of our organization. There's a 30-minute optional, just like share lunch together before the meeting and just talk about what's happening in your life and what you're doing. And I think for remote workers, that helps them feel a little more connected to other people, especially when they don't have like the water cooler talk that we all benefit from, just knowing like what's going on in Emily's life and what's happening with her kid. And so one strategy is just to establish some more at a cadence, like this is monthly for our employees, where there can be a more informal connection point. But I also think one thing that we do with people is we're good at checking in with people. I mean, you can also have some ownership over if you have remote workers or hybrid workers on your team to make sure that you're just taking on the responsibility of checking in with people more. Like, I haven't seen your face, so because it's harder to read how people are doing when they're not coming in and you're not getting able to take a read on how well they're doing. So I know maybe in an HR role, you don't want to overstep this boundary of like checking in with people and asking about their mental health, but we're just doing general check-ins with people to see just how they're doing and, if they want to share anything.
Yeah, is this okay? Okay. I don't really have a whole lot to add to that other than, I started working remote after COVID and living in a 1-bedroom apartment. My desk and bedroom were right next to each other. So again, just kind of like setting those own boundaries for yourself as well. And kind of what you were talking about earlier in being able to set those. Just some of my other strategies too that we've been incorporating are, not having, even though it's important to engage in these I love those check-ins, but also not having all of these meetings as well that are just we're meeting to meet, having them like have purpose as well. And we're starting to do like some no meeting Mondays so that our employees can really focus on what they're, because I know many of you too, it's like you start working on a task and you're getting kind of messaged all day through Teams, and it's really adding to my stress and really impacting my own mental health. So having those clear boundaries, again, even with just the job descriptions, adding these things that you can do in the culture and people, and then I feel like I'm doing a better job at making progress on my project, and that's helping my mental health. And then I can, have these meetings the following day, but just being really just a lot more intentional. And, I've been trying to reduce as many meetings as possible on my plate if they aren't really adding value. But I love the check-ins too, just having that conversation, especially if you have employees who are fully remote as well.
One more thing I just want to say about the check-in. One cue when I know I need to check in with somebody offline is when we do have meetings, and I agree, we all have way too many meetings, and I love that suggestion to do less meetings, is there are some people, when you notice a change in their behavior, like not all of a sudden they never turn on their camera anymore. Like one time isn't a big deal, but there was somebody recently who I was starting to get a little worried about, who was never turning on their camera, or when they did was like not looking rough. And I'm like, I need to do a check-in with that person. And that person was struggling, and appreciated the check-in. Like, so noticing even for people that aren't in the office when behavior changes.
So I think that you have to fundamentally rethink the role of your supervisors in the new world that we're in. We should have done this a long time ago, but we do now. If you make widgets, your supervisor's job is not to make widgets. It's to make sure the people that make the widgets are in the best position to make the widgets. And it all revolves around what we talked about today, which is engagement and mental health and blah, blah, blah. So part of how you review your supervisors should be, are they checking in on remote workers? Should be part of their job. It should be something they have to do on a regular basis. And by regular basis, I don't mean once every 6 months. I mean a regular basis, just to see how people are doing, just to see what's going on, just to see if they need anything. People do disconnect. I haven't gone back to the office. I some of you know I work in a shack in my backyard that I built. And I do a blog from it. So, and I kind of like it. But not everybody does. Even the people that have asked to work remotely, they can lose connection with your organization. And your supervisor's job is to make sure they stay connected. So make that part of their job.
I also like the 45-minute meeting suggestion that Outlook gives. Sorry. Because when you're on back-to-back meetings, you're working from home, you're like, oh, I'm working from home, I can like walk to the fridge or whatever. But if you've got stacked on the hour every hour, Outlook is like, should this be 45 minutes? And my team has been using the 45-minute meeting so that you have that naturally built-in 15-minute window.
Awesome. Thank you. So I know coming out of COVID, a lot of companies, a lot of people are talking much more about mental health, and it's becoming more of a priority at most employers, which means inevitably a lot of companies are just starting the path down supporting employees in their mental health. Given your experiences, what can companies who are just starting to prioritize mental health do? What advice could you give? But maybe more importantly, what are some of the pitfalls to avoid?
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about this, but I would recommend the bite-sized chunks. I would recommend focus groups. I would recommend asking, like, I'm sorry, what's your name? Steve. Steve, building it into a part of the conversation with your managers. You don't want it to feel hokey. And in some work environments, it's easy to feel that way if it's a culture that is just productivity driven. And so asking your folks kind of what motivates them and where you can have that latitude in the space, I think is a good place to start.
I think a pulse survey is a great place to start if you're not surveying people about what the culture is like in your organization around well-being and mental health, supporting mental health, just to get a sense of that. Focus groups is a way to get way more information if you feel comfortable and you have an environment that'll support that. But even a quick survey can give you a little bit of information. In terms of training, I do think training is a part of this. Kind of easing into training before you jump right into doing mental health first aid or a certification that takes a lot of time. One of the trainings that we offer to all of our new staff and just on a kind of a general registration basis is around, prioritizing self-care, recognizing where you are in the spectrum and taking ownership over your own well-being and building a self-care plan. And that might feel really like hokey to some employees, like build a self-care plan, but people have gotten into it and are like, oh, okay, I feel empowered. I have agency here to put some strategies in play that the organization will support. So like self-care, there, are different feelings about that. Like, oh, is that just about taking bubble baths? But we position self-care as a priority within our organization, especially because we provide services to people. And you can't be a good supervisor or a case manager or a counselor if you're not taking care of yourself. So it's ethically irresponsible, we believe, for our staff not to be taking care of themselves so that they can show up and be the best they can be for their employees or clients.
Yeah, so really just in addition to that, again, I think the Pulse survey, really identifying your organization's specific needs and tailoring it to that, and then creating a training plan, very comprehensive for our organization. We broke it even down by every single job role. Which trainings do they need? So everyone gets the QPR, clinicians get assessing and managing suicide risk, AMSR, other staff get the assist she talked about, mental health first aid, and breaking it down by what seems appropriate as well as the time and level of detail. In addition to that, I think, again, having this organization-wide initiative like kickoff, but then being really intentional about that. So, for me with the Zero of Suicide specifically, but you can make it mental health more general as well. I give talking points to all of our managers every month to incorporate in their team meetings, giving them the resources, whoever, should be responsible for that at your organization. Our newsletters are on our walls, different resources, very visible, to open up that conversation, continuing to give them up-to-date information and things that they can actually do.
So I'm going to be a lawyer for a minute and be a downer. So before you run off and start asking people if they've been diagnosed with a mental health problem and, you know, how they're feeling and stuff like that, to me, the first thing you have to do is decide what your priorities are. Okay, as a management group, as a leadership group, what are we going to look like as an organization culturally? What can we support and what can't we support at the highest level? Then you move yourself down the chain, okay? And you all know, I don't have to tell you about confidentiality requirements under the ADA, asking medical questions under the ADA and things like that. You're generally not going to get in trouble with a general survey of, you know, a temperature check of how people are. But you want to set your culture first. That's the first thing. You want to decide where you want to be. Where do we want to be? The second thing that I think you need to do, and these guys talked about it, is if you don't have an EAP, you ought to get one and get a good one. And I say that because when you need it, it's too late to go find it. All right. And you're not going to know when you need it until you've got a crisis where you need to send somebody to it. So if you don't have an EAP, get one and get a good one. And make sure you look around and make sure you talk to other people and make sure you find out it's a good one and get it in place so that when you need it, it's there.
I keep thinking so I shouldn't be first. Also, big push for DEI, right? Disability and inclusion, or diversity and inclusion efforts. I mistakenly said disability and inclusion efforts, right? Because a lot of times DEI is focusing on a person's culture, right? Gender, age. Disability is left out a lot in that. And disability can mean physical, mental health, anything under the sun that is an impact, right? That's a huge culture that any of us can join at any point in time is the disability culture, is the disability world. So when you're doing your DEI initiatives, also include disability. And oh, okay.
I really like what you said about making sure you have buy-in from your organization and agreement around what your strategy is going to be. I mean, we take for granted that we work for an organization, and probably you do too, that's so focused on well-being and mental health and disability that that's part of the water that we're swimming in every day. But you might not be breathing that same air, and so you might have to have initiate yourselves as HR professionals, maybe conversations with your leadership team around improvements that you can make. And what we've found is that sometimes there isn't agreement, even in our own leadership team, around how much focus to put on well-being and mental health initiatives. But what we do know is that we have a couple champions. So identifying who your champion is on your leadership team can be really important. That can be the one at that level who's discussing the importance and driving some of the initiatives that maybe you as an HR professional or a team that you bring together, like a kind of a project team to focus on how you can improve mental health at your organization. You know, you need a champion at the top who's with you on your team and rolling up their sleeves and making sure that there is alignment.
Thank you. So actually, I'm going to open it up to all of you, both the folks online as well as here in the office for questions. Just raise your hand and I'll sprint as best I can over to you with the microphone. I know, it's really exciting. Sure.
So I'm going to be the mean HR person with my question here. So I work in healthcare, and as you guys know, we have a lot of stringent policies, and we're super short-staffed right now. So our mental health, like if we talk about a cup being full or a cup being empty, our cups are just shattered. So when we're talking to our employees that come to me about their mental health and what they need, a lot of it is time away. And we will do that under the FMLA or the ADA. But when we're talking about flexibility and schedules and how that would help them, we don't have that flexibility to offer because we're in long-term care and our residents need our help 24/7. So, and then also with that, so if we're going to try to find something to help with mental health, I'm also a person that likes, because we're union, to be consistent kind of across the board. And that's very hard because mental health is different for every single person and what they need for those accommodations. So how do we go about with making it where one person doesn't think that their mental health is more important than another person's mental health, and that we can still move forward as an organization and build back up?
So, we all know that hangry is a thing, right? We know that if we haven't drank water enough today, we're going to have headaches, right? So what are some of the basic needs that we can provide to our staff to help take that level of stress off? I was talking to my sister. She works in a small 20-person company, and I know that this may not be feasible for everyone, but just to get your minds going, she brings in free fruit every week. She supplies the break room with fruit. She supplies the snack room with the snack room. They have a break room and a snack room with healthy snacks, having water filling stations, right? Like I'm always like, oh yes, a water and filling station. I don't have to get it out of the nasty drinking fountain, or, oh, they've got waters here, right? So what are some of the basic needs that you could help just take that stress off of your teams with? I forgot my water bottle today, or I forgot my snack, or I've got back-to-back meetings I'm not going to be able to get up, or I've got 10 patient rooms I need to go to. What are some of those basic level of care needs that you guys can kind of help with?
We talk a lot with our groups about equity. I mean, because we get the same question about other disabilities. We get the same question from our own employees. Why does that person get that fancy monitor and chair and I don't get that? Why is their disability, even if they don't use the word disability, just why do they get that and I don't? And so we have to talk a lot about how we are thinking about giving people, what they need, and not everybody needs the same thing. And and talking cleanly and clearly and concisely about what we can and can't do, because we also need people to show up. Throughout the whole pandemic, we had all of our team member workforce were essential workers, and they had to keep showing up to work. There's only so much you can do when people are scared and stressed and their kids are home from school and they still have to show up to work, right? Like mental health suffered. I mean, there was only so much we could do. We had to be really concise in our messaging around here's what we can and here's what we can't do. But there are some creative things that can be done. And I'll just give one example of something we're doing in one of our locations right now is we are using virtual reality. There are brief immersive virtual reality programs that are validated, that have been tested and have demonstrate to have stress reduction in as little as 5 minutes. That hospitals are using. The Sparrow Hospital in Lansing is using VR for their care providers. We're starting to test it. Michigan State University is partnering with us to actually test the effectiveness of this modality for stress management and well-being at work. So, I mean, and that might sound like, oh, I don't know, that sounds like way far out there. But I do think for those of us who have people who have to show up to work, you're caring for other people, we have to get creative in how we bring things to them, because our employees do sometimes just go to, I need time off work to take care of myself. And we have to say, how can we bring more care to the workplace so people feel like they can come to work and they're supported? And sometimes those are wacky out there ideas that we haven't thought about yet.
I'm gonna be a lawyer again. The little things are important, and I'm not going to discount them, but they're not a substitute for the big things, right? You don't have enough people. There's nothing you can do about it. You can try to hire and try to hire and try to hire. You don't have enough people. And bringing in cupcakes isn't going to change that. It's important, and you should still do it, but it isn't going to change that. So to me, the most important thing in your situation is being open and transparent and honest with your people about what you're doing to try to help the problem. Okay? You can't just bring in cupcakes on a Friday and call it good.
I said help.
Look at me. I don't eat healthy snacks. I miss cupcakes, right? They bring in fruit now at the firm. I don't like it. I want the cookies back. But so the situation you have is the situation you have. There aren't enough healthcare professionals. There aren't enough anything, by the way. I don't know what happened to everybody in the pandemic, but they stopped wanting to work. So you got to do what you can do, but you also have to be open with your people about where you are and what you're trying to do. And to me, if you're open and honest with your people about it and don't just ignore their requests, it's not going to fix the problem, but it'll go a long way to getting buy-in from them about what they need to do until you can fix the problem.
Also creative creativity with scheduling. I know that's like a big thing too, but adjusting start times, having a group and a B group where there's a 30-minute flex, things like that. I know it's probably tricky with unions and you're like, okay, that sounds cool. But we've had to look at job sharing where instead of doing a 10-hour day, they're doing what looks like part-time but for longer amounts of time and whatnot, and asking the folks that are on your staff what schedule works best for you, because maybe they can work 40 hours but on certain days and whatnot. So we're always trying to push our managers to be creative with the way that they schedule the workforce.
Are you a union shop? Another thing you think about is what work can non-skilled people do? How can I take some of your job duties that you would normally do away and give it to somebody else who might be easier to find than somebody with an RN, for example? And I know you've thought about all these things, but until we get people wanting to work again, we're all stuck with it, right?
So I know we're right at our time. We will stay and answer a few more questions. If anybody does have a hard stop, though, by all means, don't feel bad for having to jet out of here. We are so thankful to have all of you here. I think I mentioned at the beginning, we know that human resources does just about everything there is to do within a company, and the odds of somebody coming to you with something first over anybody else in the company are significantly higher. So you are interacting with employees day in and day out, and a lot of times you are the first responder to an employee who's going through something or in crisis. So we hope that you leave here today knowing a few more things than you did when you got here. At the very least, you have some more resources and information on accessing these wonderful folks up here. And also, it sounds like the general theme across the board today was get your managers and supervisors some training as well. Talk about mental health in the workplace. I know we've been saying that since the pandemic, but truly that is a huge step in the right direction when you are taking on this initiative. So if anyone has any questions, we do have quite a few OVD folks in the back of the room. Keep an eye out for the name tags. You can find us, but we also have a ton of information on our website. We would love to hear from you. Obviously, employee assistance programs are a huge resource. We're happy to talk with you about those options as well as mental health within your other benefit plans too. So again, if you have to leave, by all means, but I'm also going to say who has another question. Sure.
So I'm going to be specific to the Beckham. I think in your survey or partnership with the Michigan State that you're currently doing, is a component of that research have anything to do with addressing mental health in the workplace and how it affects the mental health outside of the workplace, or how does it affect the home once you've addressed it within the home? Is that part of the survey?
The virtual reality study that we're doing, we do a lot of research with Michigan State because they're just in our backyard. But this particular study is the scales that they're going to answer. They'll do a pre and a post survey, and then they'll also do daily checks in terms of well-being and mood and anxiety. And so it's going to measure some different well-being scales. It's not going to ask specifically like how long lasting was this boost that you got from this virtual reality program in terms of your home life. I mean, it's really going to provide us with information over a 3-week period that they're going to agree to use a daily virtual reality program, and it'll collect a pre and a post and then daily kind of checks around mood. And it's mostly focusing on anxiety, stress, ability to focus at work, feeling overwhelmed. There's some questions about overwhelm, and some questions kind of just around like happiness, to be honest. I mean, how happy that they feel. So it'll be interesting to see what the findings are. It may not work at all. I don't know. I mean, we're just starting the study this month with them, and we're enrolling participants now. We're using our warehousing locations to test this. We actually wanted to use it in our call centers because we operate large call centers. Our largest contract is with the State Department. And so if you call and ask about your passport in the United States, you're calling people with disabilities in Lansing, at Peckham, and in Phoenix, Arizona. And they have a high level of stress. They're dealing with unhappy people all day and stressed out people on the phones who, have issues with their passport or need a passport. Somebody died and they need to get out of the country. And so we actually wanted to test this with call center agents, but they were too stressed to participate in the study. So we're testing it in a different business line, and then we're hoping that the results show that it's an effective intervention that we could bring to something like our call center.
Any other questions? Sure. Here I come.
Hi. This is related to dialing 988. If someone was dialing 988 on behalf of someone else who was maybe experiencing, letting them know that they were feeling, having suicidal thoughts or tendencies, is there ever like a legal or ethical obligation from a 988 operator to prompt like police intervention? And what do we say to like reassure somebody who might be afraid to dial 988 on behalf of someone else because they're like, ooh, I don't want the police showing up at this person's home or getting involved in some way?
Yeah, that's a really tough question, and it definitely does happen. And so, yes, when the trained counselor, if they're talking to someone or they're on speaker with you and the other person that's kind of in crisis, there's certain cues and trainings that the individual goes through. And if at a point where the trained counselor believes that that person is in an immediate harm to themselves, they will get 911 involved to do kind of a welfare check. I guess I'm not sure. Does anyone else have any thoughts on like how you would navigate that conversation? Because I would not want that to be a barrier to someone.
When I think about suicide intervention and prevention, I always think I'd rather have someone mad at me than dead. So I'll call the police. I will call 911 and do a welfare check. And if you're mad at me about it, that's okay with me. So, we do some, suicide intervention training too. And that's a discussion that we have. We have sometimes staff and clients who are like, I, for whatever reason, I don't want an ambulance coming, or I don't want the police involved. And we're saying, there are limits to the agreements that we can make. And if it's about saving your life, we're going to do what we need to do, even if you're not happy about that decision.
So that's why it's important also to have, if you are able to have a team who's really more well-versed in this area. I had an incident where somebody actually came in for a job interview and said, if I don't get this job, I'm going to go jump off the bridge on, 496? Is that what go through Lansing? 496. And I'm like, okay. Are you really going to do that? Are you headed there? Do you have a car? Like asking them these questions. And then what I give are options, right? I have to report this. I am, a mandated reporter, and I'm here. You're safe here. We can call an ambulance to come and get you. We have also just called the local police. So instead of having the calling 911, we've called the local police to come in and assess, and they don't come in with their sirens blaring. They just come in and meet with the individual. Or we talk about helping the individual get to the hospital themselves. So we give them a few different options. It's not like you're going to die in this moment, so you need to go to the hospital right now, and the only way is by a blaring ambulance. We try to do it, honorably and, for lack of better words, discreetly, and give the person a variety of options. You're shaking your head over there. I probably said something illegal, but we work at a human services agency, so I'm wearing a human services hat. Do what makes sense legally for your organizations if you don't wear a human services hat.
I'll just say that's an interesting barrier to receiving help. I've never actually had somebody say I would be reluctant to call a hotline because they might call the police to do a welfare check. I guess I would want to explore what their rationale behind that is, like just a fear of the police, or they've had bad experiences with the police. And you can never guarantee that they're future experience with an officer is going to be better. But we do try to reassure our team members that we work with that, you know, there's a lot of focus on training officers to be better at understanding mental health conditions and be more sensitive to responding in a more, you know, sensitive way, I guess, to people that are in crisis. So, you know, but I use that cautiously with people. I say, obviously, I can't guarantee the experience you're going to have, but that we try to promote that the police work in partnership with us, and they do. Almost all the experiences we've had where we've used the police to help transport somebody to get help have been positive.
Door you tell them to, they won't turn their sirens on, things like that. And you can let them know ahead of time. For this individual, he didn't want all the attention, and so we said, this individual is really nervous about the attention from the police, and so you just put it all out there. Go ahead.
Oh, sure. Online question. Are the questions posted online for? Okay, I just want to make sure everybody online could read the question as well. So go ahead.
So there are some kind of general pulse surveys out there around mental health that you can search for and find the questions that you like the best. We choose to use Mental Health America is a good resource. They have a Bell Seal certification program, BELL, like picture an actual bell that you would ring. Bell Seal. So the Bell Seal program offers a metric-based certification system for employers around supporting mental health in the workplace. The reason I like that approach is because it's multidimensional. It's not just what survey questions do you ask, but how do you start down the path toward building a more comprehensive culture that supports mental well-being at work. And so, I mean, there is a nominal fee if you actually want to pursue the certification. Like, we have more than 1,000 employees, so it costs us $300 a year to participate and get our scores and recommendations for how we can continue to improve what we're doing at Peckham. But they can supply some like starter, if you're just starting on the journey, like some tips, including pulse survey questions that could help somebody. But I mean, there's a lot of good survey questions that are out there that an organization could bring together and talk about which ones do we think fit us best. And that's often what we do. I mean, we even build in some mental health questions, and we're not asking about your diagnosis. We've never asked that question of our general pulse surveys. It's more about, you know, how the culture could better support their well-being and their mental health, and, you know, pain points, asking about pain points. So just to avoid any, you know, compliance issues of asking people to disclose their mental illness if they don't want to do that.
Awesome. Were there any other online questions?
That's great. We're glad to hear that.
Wonderful. All right. Well, for everyone that's still with us, we will be sending a PowerPoint presentation, this PowerPoint presentation out in a follow-up email. I know there were some slides we didn't quite get through. We'll also include all of our speaker contact information if you have any follow-up questions. So feel free to hang out. If you have other questions you want to ask us one-on-one, you're more than welcome to, but also keep an eye out for that email coming either later today or tomorrow. So thank you all again so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.